Chapter 1736. Leiden carried over 2 bowls of mutton that were almost full to the brim. He looked at Amy and said with a smile, "You're so cute, little girl. What a big bowl." "Thank you, Uncle." She couldn't wait to pick up her chopsticks and said to Mag, "Father, I'll start eating first." Mag nodded as he looked at the big bowl of mutton in front of him with glowing eyes. "Go ahead." Meg nodded with a smile and picked up his chopsticks. He also wanted to try the improved mutton stew to see if it had really become a delicious dish. "Oh, woo." Amy put a piece of mutton into her mouth and chewed. Her eyes lit up, and her chewing speed immediately increased. As she chewed, her body could not help but sway slightly from side to side. Meg glanced at Amy, who was swaying tactically. It seemed like this mutton stew suited Amy's taste very well. He also picked up a piece of mutton. The mutton was cut in a rather casual manner. It was about the size of an adult's mouth, and the color was bright red. It looked very appetizing. The aroma wafted over along with the steam. The strong, rank odor of the mutton from before was almost negligible, and in its place was a rich mutton aroma. Other than that, there was also the aroma of various spices. One particular aroma caught Meg's attention. It was an indescribable aroma. It was a spice that he had never seen before, but now that it had appeared in this mutton stew, it made the taste of the mutton even more special. Last time, the strong, rank odor made Meg give up as soon as he put it in his mouth. But this time, he was looking forward to trying it out. He opened his mouth and put the whole piece of mutton into his mouth. With a light bite, delicious and rich gravy flowed out of the soft mutton. Compared to the freshness of the mutton soup, the gravy was much richer. The rich meat aroma splashed in his mouth, causing his taste buds to instantly jump for joy. Chewing carefully, the mutton was soft but not mushy. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. Meg could feel the presence of the spices. Together, they created a delicious space rich in layers, and that faint special aroma was like a layer of fog, causing one to accidentally step into a delicious trap. The mutton stew might not be perfect, but in Meg's heart, it was definitely a delicacy, and a very unique one at that. Leiden and his son, as well as Harrison and George, were all looking at Meg nervously and expectantly. They were like students waiting for their teacher to announce the results of an exam. After all, they hadn't let Meg try their improved mutton stew before. Meg swallowed the piece of mutton in his mouth and immediately put another piece into his mouth. A smile appeared on his face as he calmly enjoyed the delicious taste in his mouth. "Can I have a bowl of rice?" Meg put down his chopsticks, looked up at Muir, and said with a smile, "If such a delicious mutton stew isn't accompanied by a bowl of white rice, it seems to be missing something." "All right, please wait a moment." Muir's eyes lit up and he quickly turned to walk toward Good-for-Nothing. A smile also appeared on Leiden's face. Having received Meg's approval, he felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He had not let Meg down. "Wow, it seems like Mr. Mack has a very high opinion of this mutton stew," Harrison said with a smile. "If even Mr. Mack is satisfied with this mutton stew, it seems like our mutton restaurant's business will not be bad," George said with a happy smile. "The rank odor of the mutton is completely removed. The ratio of spices is also very suitable, and the heat is just right. It's soft but not mushy, and the more you chew, the more fragrant it becomes." Meg commented seriously. Then, he looked at Leiden curiously and said, "But if I may ask, there's a very special spice added to this mutton stew. What is it? I don't think I've ever seen it before." Leiden thought for a while, and his eyes lit up. He took out a half-foot-long black branch from the cupboard at the side and said, "You're talking about this, right?" Meg took the branch and sniffed it. His eyes lit up, and he nodded. "Yes, that's the fragrance. This is a type of short tree that grows in the mountains near our tribe. I call it yin. Herders usually cut it down to use as firewood. Once, I accidentally dropped a branch in when I was cooking mutton and realized that it tasted surprisingly good. So, I kept the habit of adding yin to my mutton stew," Leiden said, a little embarrassed. "Your naming skills are really unusual." Meg looked at him with admiration. However, he was indeed very interested in this spice called yin. The appearance of a spice was often due to many coincidences. Before Leiden came, perhaps no herder would have thought that the wood they used to light the fire every day could make mutton so delicious. Delicacies were gradually developed from such coincidences. Thank you to our great ancestors. Thank you to those wise people who were brave enough to try. Meg sighed in his heart. He returned the spice to Leiden and said with a smile, "It's pretty good. This spice will become the most unique symbol of your mutton stew." Hee. Leiden laughed good-naturedly. "Your rice." More quickly placed a bowl of rice in front of Meg. "Thank you." Meg nodded on my behalf. "See, father, you still want to eat rice." Amy tilted her head and looked at Meg proudly. "Yes, my Amy has extraordinary intuition when it comes to food." Meg nodded with a smile. He picked up his chopsticks and ate a mouthful of rice. Then, he picked up a piece of mutton and put it into his mouth. The rice was paired with the delicious mutton stew. Even though Meg and Amy had already eaten lunch, they still enjoyed it very much. Leiden even specially scooped a small bowl of mutton for Ugly Duckling to eat alone. "Meow, meow," Ugly Duckling cried out happily as it ate. This was the first time it had received such treatment. After all, it usually only ate leftovers when it went out, depending on Amy's mood. Not long after, the rice and mutton in their bowls were almost emptied at the same time. Burp, the two of them burped at the same time. Then, they looked at each other and smiled. "Father, we seem to be too full." Amy winked at Meg. "Because the mutton is too delicious." Meg nodded with a smile. "Would you like another bowl?" Leiden rubbed his hands together as he asked, feeling overwhelmed by the unexpected favor. No, I really can't eat anymore." Meg quickly waved his hands. If he hadn't eaten lunch, he would consider another bowl. However, he was indeed a little full now. "Save my bowl first. I'll eat it next time," Amy reminded him seriously. Okay. Leiden nodded with a smile. Meg took out 8 silver coins from his money pouch and handed them to Leiden. He said, "Thank you for your hospitality. The mutton stew is indeed very delicious. I'm sure your business will be very good in the future." "I can't accept this money. This is your restaurant, too." Leiden immediately retracted his hand. He looked at Meg and sincerely said, "There's something else I'd like to ask you. This is my first time opening a restaurant, and I'm suddenly facing so many customers. How can I make the customers as satisfied as possible?" Meg looked at Leiden with a smile and said, "You can only achieve success if you stick to your initial principles." Book House website. Chapter 1737. Meg used these words to replace the 80 copper coin meal fee. As for whether Leiden and his son could keep those words, that would be up to them. "Father, have you learned how to make mutton stew?" Amy sat at the back of the bicycle and asked Meg expectantly. "This dish was created by Uncle Leiden. I didn't learn how to make it from him." Meg shook his head with a smile. "If Amy still wants to eat it, I'll bring you here next time." "Okay." Amy nodded happily. Meow, Ugly Duckling poked its little head out of the basket. Although it was carsick, it still didn't want to lose its presence. Amy poked her head out from behind Meg and said decisively, "I'm not bringing you." Meow. Ugly Duckling retracted its head, aggrieved. "Ding! Congratulations, host, for helping Leiden and his son achieve their dream. You have obtained a chance to spin the mysterious wheel." Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. "Mysterious wheel? Isn't it a big gift pack?" Meg raised his eyebrows. The mysterious gift pack is a chance to draw any valuable item, including high-tier recipes, a strength point, super-grade kitchenware. What are the chances of drawing a strength point? Meg's eyes were already completely lit up, and even his breathing had quickened. 1%. Isn't that too low? I've made such a huge contribution to this world, giving them the chance to taste the delicious mutton stew, and even helped a father and son who wanted to open a restaurant to achieve their dream. And there's only a 1% chance of drawing a strength point? You have to know that Dad is dying now. If that octopus monster escapes from the seal, this world will be destroyed, and Amy's will no longer be glorious. The main mission of me becoming the god of cookery will also become nothing, and you will become a useless system that will be mocked by countless systems, and even kicked out of the group chat, Meg said deeply. Who leaked the news? Ahem. According to the system's deduction, whether or not the host can obtain physical strength points will not directly help in resealing the Great Old Ones. Even if you obtain physical strength points, there is no way to prevent the Great Old Ones from destroying the world. Nonsense. If I recover my strength, at least I can run faster. If I run faster, then I'll have a chance to make a comeback. Then you'll have a chance to re-enter the group. Meg said seriously. Does that sound reasonable? But something doesn't seem right. The system muttered. Are there any chance cards for this mysterious roulette wheel? Is it the kind of card that can increase the probability of drawing a certain option? This seems possible. That's right. Meg smiled. Probability enhancement card. 1% chance increase. Can be stacked. Selling price. 10 million copper coins per piece. It can be stacked. 10 million copper coins for one? Meg frowned. System, this is daylight robbery. It's a temporary prop. The price is generally higher. Please make the purchase at your discretion. The system sounded smug. All right, give me 99 cards, Meg said without much hesitation. 99 cards? Host, are you sure you want to buy? The system seemed to be in disbelief and quickly gave a price. 990 million copper coins. Yes, I want 99 cards with a 100% chance of drawing the physical strength points, Meg said with certainty. Money was saved to be spent. He had collected quite a bit of wealth from Dragon Island and the Fok tribe. The total was about $1 billion. This time, he spent all of it in one go. However, in the face of a world that might become chaotic, power was far more important than money. Therefore, he didn't even bat an eyelid when he spent the money. He wanted a 100% chance of breaking through to 10th tier before the peace conference started. Ding! 990 million copper coins have been deducted. The remaining amount will be converted from the host's own items. 99 chance increase cards have been issued. The mysterious roulette wheel has been activated. Host, please start the lucky draw as soon as possible. The system's brisk voice sounded. It even added a background music of money falling into a bag. Useless. Meg pursed his lips as he looked at the roulette wheel that appeared in his mind. As he used the chance increase cards one by one, there was only 0. 5 physical strength points left on the roulette wheel. Perfect. Meg pressed the start button with a smile. The needle symbolically spun a few rounds before finally stopping. Congratulations, host. You have drawn physical strength plus 0. 5. The system's fake congratulations sounded. Very good. Meg accepted that precious physical strength point with satisfaction. This wasn't a simple lucky draw. It was a lucky draw that could change his fate. Although money couldn't solve all problems, it could solve most problems. For example, bribing the lousy system. Father, are you smiling? Amy asked curiously as she tilted her head and looked at Meg's side profile. Meg, would you believe me if I said I was Superman? Meg asked with a smile. Of course. Of course, Father is Superman. A super powerful lord, Amy said with a nod. It's not easy to be Superman. Meg's smile was full of confidence. He seemed to have finally gained the courage to shoulder everything. At the same time, a heavy responsibility appeared. The old feud with the Roth Empire's royal family, Amy's future, the great old ones that he had to face directly, the situation of the Norland continent at the crossroads. He couldn't avoid all of these. After returning to the restaurant, Meg didn't share this joy with anyone. He made himself a pot of tea, went to the study on the second floor, and locked himself in the study. He needed to calm down. When his power recovered to 10th tier, all his plans would be different. He knew that he had to shoulder some things and fight for some things. 10th tier lightning. It must be wonderful, right? Meg picked up the teacup and finished it in one gulp. A smile appeared on his face. Sally, this is your first time representing the elves in front of all the other races after you became the elven princess. Irina should be there too. I hope your performance won't disappoint me. In the starry cave in the wind forest, Helena looked down at Sally with a cold voice. Sally nodded slightly and said, I will do my best to protect the elves' dignity and interests. Helena looked at her deeply and said, Go. Yes. Sally turned and walked out of the cave, High Priestess, if you let Princess Sally lead the team, will she lose to Irina in terms of aura? A superior elf asked worriedly. Can you beat Irina in terms of aura if I send you? Helena glanced at him. That elf shrunk his neck and didn't dare to say anything else. This is something she has to face sooner or later. This is just the simplest test. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1738. All the races were invited to this meeting before the peace conference, and all the invitations were in accordance with the rules of the peace conference. This made all the races on the Norland continent focus their attention on Chaos City. On the seemingly peaceful continent, the border armies of all the races were sharpening their swords in preparation for the war that would ensue after the failure of the peace conference. Even the dwarves, who had trade relations with all the races, had started to limit the number of merchants entering and leaving Isen Castle. They might even seal off the passage into the castle at any time. With the arrival of the various races' representatives, the City Lord's Castle's concierge department started to get busy. Luckily, the City Lord's Castle was already familiar with the series of meetings and arrangements, so it was not messy. Dicus walked into the study and said to Michael, City Lord, Miss Hill has just sent someone over. She said that the first train's trial run is completed, and it will depart in an hour's time. Very good. It's time for us to set off too. Michael stood up and walked to the door. City Lord, the August Tribe's chief, Auster, the Flaming Demon's chief, and a few other representatives have just arrived at the City Lord's castle. Do you want to meet them first? Dicus reminded. There's plenty of time to meet them tomorrow. They can't be compared to the railway workers who have worked hard for countless days and nights. Michael walked out of the door without any reluctance. All right. Dicus kept the folder in his hand and quickly followed after Michael. In a forest about 15 kilometers north of Chaos City, there was a straight railway running through the forest. At the end of the railway was a stone wall. At this moment, a steel monster was being dragged out of the stone wall by a few orcs and stopped in front of the stone wall. This was a steel monster that was 5 meters tall and over 20 meters long. Its long chimney reached into the sky as if it had grown a horn. The sides of the railway were filled with fatigued-looking workers and designers, but their eyes were shining. On the train, there were also 10 odd technicians doing the final inspection and debugging to ensure that the train could depart successfully. After 3 months of hard work and the hard work of thousands of outstanding blacksmiths and designers, they finally created this steel monster. Only they knew how much effort they had put in. Young mistress, the news has been sent to the City Lord's castle in Mamies, the secretary said to Hill, who was standing at the side. All right, then let's wait for the City Lord and Mr. Meg to witness this moment that might change the course of the world. Hill nodded slightly and smiled as he looked at the steel behemoth that was reflecting a metallic luster under the sunlight. Although she had already become the most famous career woman in Chaos City, or even the Norland continent, the voices of doubt didn't stop just because she had led Buffett Bank to greater heights over the years. The most they talked about was that she had only inherited Buffett Banks. No matter who sat in that position, they would be able to make a lot of money. The Hill disdained to defend such ridiculous words, but she had always wanted to make her own breakthrough outside of Buffett Bank. The appearance of the steam locomotive allowed her to see this possibility. It was a potential market that could surpass the banks, a possibility that could change the world. Meg, who had just brought Amy back to the restaurant, met the staff sent by the Hill. Then, he brought Amy onto the other party's horse-drawn carriage and rushed to the Steam Locomotive Research Center. The steam engine had changed the world before, and Meg believed that it could still change the world here. With the help of capital and politics, it would change people's lives and the way they traveled at an even faster speed. And today was a historic moment. The results of the hard work of countless staff over the past few months would finally be revealed. The first steam locomotive on the Norland continent would have its first official test run on the railway. Father, where are we going? Amy asked curiously as she sat in the horse-drawn carriage and looked at Meg, who couldn't hide his excitement. She had rarely seen such an expression on her father's face. To the north. Take Amy to the train. Mag smiled. As the initiator of this project, he had invested quite a lot of emotions into it, and had even participated in a few of the debugging and research works. He was just as anxious and expectant as all the staff members about the results of this official road operation. Train? A car on fire? Amy blinked. No, it's a car that runs on fire. Meg shook his head with a smile. Oh, then it must be burning the horse's tail, right? Why don't we try it now? Amy lifted a corner of the carriage's curtain and looked at the 4 unicorns that were running wildly in front of them. She was eager to give it a try, and a bluish-purple flame had already lit up on her fingertips. It's not burning the horse's tail. Amy will know in a while. Meg quickly grabbed Amy's little hand and looked apologetically at the staff whose eyes were gradually widening due to nervousness. Oh, Amy put down the carriage's curtain obediently. Then, she turned her gaze to the staff and curiously asked, Uncle, are you very hot? Why is there so much sweat on your forehead? Ahem. I might be wearing a little too much. That staff tugged at his slightly thin uniform awkwardly. He had heard about this little princess from Amy's before, and knew that she was a little magic prodigy with 2 unbelievably powerful masters. The horse-drawn carriage left Chaos City and headed north. Meg and Amy arrived at the Research and Development Center almost at the same time as Michael and the rest. Mr. Mack, you're here too, Michael said with a smile as he got down from the black Cheelant's back and looked at Meg, who was coming out of the horse-drawn carriage. City Lord. Meg nodded slightly at Michael as a greeting. His gaze landed on the steam locomotive that was parked quietly on the tracks at the side. The angular front of the locomotive was distinct, and the black metal body was giving off a cold metallic glow. Uncle City Lord, are you here to take the train too? Amy came out of the horse-drawn carriage and looked at Michael in surprise. Yes. Little boss, are you here to take the train with Mr. Mack too? Michael asked Amy with a smile. Apart from Master, no one knows fire better than me. If there's any danger, I can't protect Father, Amy said with a nod. That's great. Then, Little boss will have to protect me too, Michael said seriously. I'll have to think about it. Amy rested her chin on her hand as she pondered. City Lord, Mr. Meg, you're here? Right then, Mr. Hill walked up and said to the 2 of them, the first steam locomotive is ready to depart. There's still 15 minutes before it departs. Do you have anything to say to everyone? 10 minutes. The 3 of us will take 3 minutes each, Michael said with a smile as he boarded the train first. Chapter 1739. The manufacturing of the steam locomotive and the laying of the railway were a result of Buffett Bank's investment, regardless of the cost. Together with Chaos City's support, they were able to build the steam locomotive in just a few months, and at the same time, connect Chaos City, the Elven Railway. The City Lord's castle's contribution was no less than that of Buffett Bank's. Many of the workers present were from the City Lord's castle. Hence, as soon as the City Lord Michael boarded the steam locomotive, the crowd applauded enthusiastically. Thank you for your hard work, everyone. On behalf of the City Lord's castle, on behalf of Chaos City, and on behalf of all the citizens on the continent who might have benefited from avoiding a war because of you, I would like to extend my highest respect to all of you, Michael said in a loud and sincere voice before bowing deeply to everyone. The crowd applauded thunderously, and many of the workers couldn't help but turn their faces away to wipe their tears secretly. Michael straightened up and nodded at Hill, indicating that she could come up. The whole process took less than 2 minutes. Hill looked at the exhausted faces below the stage and said with the same sincerity, I am Hill Buffett. Thank you for your double efforts during this period. I promise that apart from the normal salary, all the workers will receive half a month's salary as a bonus after all the work is done. Cheers erupted below the stage again, and everyone smiled joyfully. Due to the uniqueness of the project, the salary level was already much higher than outside work. They didn't expect to receive half a month's salary as a bonus, which was a huge surprise to many people. Hill looked at Meg. Everyone also looked at Meg. Many of the workers recognized this young man. He was someone who even the chief engineer respected very much. He would be invited to every important debugging, and they would listen to his opinion before making changes to the steam locomotive. Furthermore, it was said that he was the designer of the steam locomotive and also the initiator of this project. They were gathered here because of this man. He overcame all kinds of impossibilities and created this incredible big guy. 10 minutes, and you left me 7 minutes? Meg raised his eyebrows slightly, but everyone's gazes were already focused on him. As the initiator, he had to say a few words, and there were indeed many things he wanted to say. Meg held Amy's hand and walked up the wide and flat metal stairs of the steam locomotive to the platform in front of the locomotive. The boiler had already started burning, and the entire locomotive was warm. Even the metal railings were warm. The little girl is so cute. Yes, she must have a beautiful elf mother. This gentleman is also very handsome. Everyone looked at the father and daughter and couldn't help but whisper to each other, "Hello, I'm Meg, the head chef and owner of Amy's. I'm also the father of Amy, a contributing student. Just like you, I'm an ordinary but indispensable member of the steam locomotive's creation process," Meg said with a smile. Everyone smiled knowingly. Although this was Meg's humble words, it made them feel equal and respected, as well as a sense of recognition for their work during this period of time. I'm very touched to see this steam locomotive finally see the light of day. It's a bold and imaginative idea, and a group of capable partners. You've created a miracle, and perhaps it's also the prelude to a new era. You will be remembered in the history of the Norland continent. On your epitaphs, it can be written, "One of the creators of the steam locomotive." This is an honor that belongs to you. It's the honor of this world to have you, Meg said from the bottom of his heart. Warm applause broke out below the stage, and tears glistened in the eyes of the people below the stage. Meg looked at them quietly and felt his vision blur a little. He had the opportunity to become one of these engineers, but unfortunately, his conditions didn't allow it. His family was simply too rich. However, his spirit was with them. A hint of surprise flashed across Mr. Hill's eyes as he looked at Meg. Michael was looking at Meg with admiration. Of course, there was also a hint of surprise. In his impression, Alex wasn't someone who could say such sentimental words. These uncles and aunties must be very powerful and great people, right? Amy stood there obediently and looked up at Meg. Then, she looked at the staff standing below and thought to herself, "That's right. There's no need to repeat the praises. You're the best team I've ever seen. What I want to talk to you about is the future of the steam locomotive and the railway. I want to tell you what a great thing you're doing now," Meg said with a smile after the applause died down. Everyone's voices gradually lowered as they looked at Meg expectantly. They knew that the steam locomotive might change some things, but they couldn't predict what changes would happen. Meg continued, "The steam locomotive that burns oars to obtain kinetic energy will replace most of the transportation and become the first choice for medium and long-distance travel and freight transport. Our railway tracks will be spread all over the Norland continent, and people will be able to choose to take the train to any place. The world will be integrated at an unprecedented speed, and many industries and barriers will be greatly impacted. Perhaps in the near future, we will be able to see a world that is gradually integrating, and the railways will be like a net that connects the entire continent together." The pairs of eyes gradually lit up. Some were in disbelief, and some were elated. They got together and made a steam locomotive that could run by burning a fire. However, they had never thought that this steam locomotive would have such a huge impact on the Norland continent. They could feel their blood boiling just by listening to Meg's description. Mr. Hill's eyes also lit up as he looked at Meg. He pursed his lips as if he wanted to say something, but stopped himself. Whether it's Alex back then or Mr. Meg now, he is always impressive. Michael took the lead to clap his hands as he looked at Meg with admiration. He lamented in his heart, "He is so much calmer now." It seems that the ambush 3 years ago and little Amy still had a big impact on him. Listening to the loud applause and looking at the pairs of sparkling eyes, Meg was a little surprised at his improvisational ability. Maybe he should have learned from Rebus and wandered around the mobile phone industry. Maybe he could have held a MS-10 product launch. After the applause stopped, Mr. Hill took a look at his watch and nodded slightly at Meg. "It's a great honor to be able to participate in the trial run of SS Peace with all of you here today. Now, let us witness this moment together," Meg said loudly. Woo! A long whistle sounded, and white smoke rushed out of the chimney. The huge train started to tremble slightly, and then slowly moved forward with a sizzling sound. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1740. A melodious whistle sounded, and the huge steam locomotive started to tremble slightly before moving forward slowly. Everyone watched this scene with their eyes wide open. They watched as the steam locomotive started to move slowly, witnessing this moment that would go down in history. All the hard work he had put in over the past few months had paid off perfectly at this moment. They had succeeded. The train is moving. There were thunderous cheers, and many people threw their hats into the sky. Meanwhile, Amy, who had been very obedient and quiet all this while, suddenly had flaming wheels appear under her feet, and her magic caster's staff appear in her hand. She pointed at the steam locomotive with a vigilant expression. What kind of demon is that? It's a train. Meg quickly carried the little one down as he tried to hold back his laughter. Amy kept her flaming wheels, but still frowned and said, "But it's shouting at me." Hill, who was at the side, twitched his mouth. His gaze drifted to the sky as he tried his best not to laugh out loud. "It's reminding everyone that it's about to move, and it's blowing the whistle," Meg explained with a smile. He didn't dare to let his great aunt blow the train. Otherwise, Gong Chungshi's heart would be broken. Oh, Amy sized up the locomotive for a while, more before putting her magic caster's staff away. Under the watchful eyes of the many staff members, the train slowly left the departure point and moved forward steadily. Its speed gradually increased, and it gradually became a black dot moving forward in a straight line in their line of sight. The staff members on the train also burst into cheers. Meg could feel their joy, and he could empathize with them. He had never thought that he would be able to travel on a steam locomotive on the Norland continent. Everything had happened too quickly, and it felt like a dream. Meg stood at the front of the locomotive and felt the steam locomotive's operating condition. The speed had already been raised to the maximum, which was about 50 kilometers per hour. It was an incredible speed, and the operation was relatively stable. However, there was still a lot of room for optimization in terms of shock absorption, and the jerks during the journey were still a little strong. For the steam locomotive's first official trial run, this was already an impeccable result. "Now, I completely believe what you said previously." Michael looked at Meg with admiration. "This is indeed an invention that can change the world. I hope for world peace." Meg smiled. Michael nodded. "I think this big guy will make the representatives of the various races change their minds. In terms of trade, it will bring about disruptive changes to the world. Maybe we can have a drink to celebrate." Hill smiled. Her assistant took out the red wine that had already been prepared and poured it into 3 crystal glasses. "To the victory of this battle against time," Michael said with a smile as he took the glass. "For world peace." Meg picked up the wine glass. "Happy cooperation." Hill raised his glass. After a brief celebration, Michael got out of the car early. There were still many things waiting for him to deal with at the city lord's mansion. Meg, on the other hand, took Amy on a tour of the interior of the train. 2 bare-chested, stocky dwarves were shoveling coal into the boiler. The blazing flames made the temperature in the boiler room quite high. "So the train is a car that burns fire, not a car that spits fire," Amy muttered thoughtfully. She looked up at Meg and asked, "Those 2 dwarven uncles are having a hard time. Do you need my help?" "No need. Amy's flames are different from theirs. They might cook the train." Meg quickly stopped Amy from helping. If she threw a fireball, the boiler might explode. "Let's go. Let's go to the carriage at the back to take a look." Meg led Amy into the next carriage. The second carriage was a passenger carriage. According to Meg's suggestion, rows of seats were custom-made. There were 4 seats in a row, and each carriage could accommodate 100 passengers. However, there were no customers today. The carriage was full of steam locomotive designers and testers. They were busy recording various data during the operation of the train. "Mr. Meg." Chief Engineer Blair stepped forward and shook Meg's hand excitedly. "We did it." "Yes, we did it." Meg also held Blair's hand tightly. Looking at his increasingly balding appearance, it was obvious that he had put in a lot of effort for this project. "Grandpa, I recommend you try our restaurant's Buddha jumps over the wall. Your hair will grow back," Amy said seriously as she looked at Blair's hair. Okay." Blair smiled and nodded. He looked at Meg and said, "This little girl is so cute. She takes after her mother." Meg replied a little proudly. However, he soon talked to Blair about some of the problems he felt earlier. Meg participated in almost the entire trial run process and gave his own opinions on some of the optimizations. The trial run was very successful. At least, they successfully drove the train out and back in one piece. Mr. Meg, thank you for taking the time to participate in the trial run, Hill said to Meg as he stood in front of the carriage. That's what I should do. Meg nodded. There's something I would like you to consider. Are you willing to participate in the development of a series of steam engine and steam locomotive products with me? Whether it's shares or remuneration, you can ask for them yourself. Hill looked at Meg seriously and said, You are the most suitable person I have ever seen to do this. I believe that you and I can create a huge business empire that far surpasses Buffett Bank's. I agree with you on this point. Mag looked at Shear with a smile and shook his head as he said, However, I'm very sorry. Compared to creating a huge business empire, I prefer cooking and taking care of children. That kind of happiness cannot be replaced by any amount of money. Hill was a little disappointed, but he quickly smiled and said, That's an expected answer. However, I will always keep this position for you. If you change your mind, you can let me know anytime. Okay. Meg nodded with a smile. Where's the child you mentioned? I want to see her, Lewis asked Jinx as he walked out of the Castellan's residence. She's working as a waiter in a restaurant. I can bring you there, Jinx said. Waiter? Lewis frowned. How can a child of the Golden Dragon tribe be a waiter? That's nothing. The little princess of the Frost Dragon tribe is also a waiter there. Jinx shrugged nonchalantly. He looked at the incredulous Lewis with a smile and said, Uncle, that restaurant is not ordinary. It doesn't seem to be something embarrassing to be a waiter there. Could it be opened by a powerhouse? Lewis's brows were still tightly knitted. That's not it. You'll know when you see it for yourself. Jinx kept him in suspense. End of chapter. Chapter 1741. Have you contacted that child recently? Lewis asked Jinx as they sat in the horse-drawn carriage that the city lord's castle had specially sent. I gave her my contact details, but she never contacted me once. She didn't come to Dragon Island to look for me, either. Jinx shook his head and helplessly said, Perhaps Dragon Island isn't that attractive compared to that restaurant. Lewis frowned and became even more puzzled. What's the background of that restaurant? Even Dragon Island can't compare to it? It's not about the background. You'll know in a while. Jinx shrugged. It was really not easy to explain. If anyone dares to stop my Golden Dragon tribe's child from going home, I will never let him off, Lewis said coldly. Jinx blinked and didn't answer. The horse-drawn carriage stopped, and the coachman's voice came from outside. Dear guests, we have arrived at Amy's. Uncle, this is Chaos City, after all, and we are guests. No matter what happens later, you have to bear with it. After all, we're here to facilitate negotiations. It's not good to fall out with the host, Jinx specially reminded before alighting from the carriage. Lewis replied in a deep voice. They were facing a great enemy, and they still had to rely on Chaos City to get all the races to put aside their prejudices and face the enemy together. They really couldn't afford to offend Chaos City. Then, let's go to this special restaurant. Jinx alighted from the horse-drawn carriage first. Lewis followed closely behind. He frowned as he looked at the long line in front of the restaurant. What are they doing now? Waiting in line to eat, Jinx said calmly. He had already seen such a scene the last time he came. We have to wait in line to eat? I'm from the Golden Dragon tribe, Lewis said with displeasure. Even if their city lord Michael came to eat, he would have to line up at the back obediently, Jinx said with a shrug. Who exactly is this restaurant owner? Could it be opened by some old monster? Lewis was even more puzzled as he looked at the beautiful restaurant door with a frown. Not really. This restaurant owner is just an ordinary human. Jinx shook his head. An ordinary human? Lewis raised his brow. However, her daughter is quite impressive. She is the magical goddess who was accepted as a disciple by both Crassus and Julian, Jinx replied. I have some recollection of this, but even if it's because of his daughter, this boss dares to make Michael wait in line outside? Lewis was still confused. You might not believe it, but most of the people waiting in line outside are willing to do so. Furthermore, The restaurant hasn't opened for business yet. These are all customers who came to line up in advance and are afraid that there won't be any seats later, Jinx said helplessly. Willing. Louis sized up the customers in the queue. There was no lack of powerful people from various races in the queue. None of them showed any dissatisfaction with the queue, and the atmosphere seemed to be pretty good. That's right. The culinary skills of the owner of this restaurant are unparalleled on the Norland continent. You'll know once you try it, Jinx said with a smile. Heh, human food is not to our liking. Louis pursed his lips in disdain. Don't say that too early. I think the queue here is a little shorter. Why don't we queue here for hot pot today? Jinx was about to walk to the queue at the side when he saw Louis standing there. He softly said, Don't you want to see that child? You won't be able to see her from here. All right. For the sake of that child, I'll force myself to go in and take a seat. Louis followed Jinx to the back of the queue. He squinted at the customers standing in front of him and pursed his lips in disdain. They were just people that he could kill with his dragon's breath. What a rare sight. Jinx, who was standing behind Louis, moved his lips and tried not to laugh out loud. Oh, we're late today. There's definitely no tofu pudding. Harrison and Julian jumped off the horse-drawn carriage and sighed when they saw the long queue at the entrance of the restaurant. We haven't had hot pot for a while. Why don't we have it tonight? Julian suggested. Sure. Harrison nodded and walked to the back of the two queues in front of the designated hot pot area. The queue was getting longer. After waiting for a long time, Louis looked a little impatient. He was the chief of the Golden Dragon tribe, a top powerhouse with a high status among the dragons. Yet, he was actually queuing up with a bunch of mortals for a meal. This was simply, welcome, Amy's. Before Louis, who was getting angrier and angrier, could express his anger, the door of the restaurant, which had been closed all this while, suddenly opened outwards. A young human walked out with a smile. The queue that had been stationary all this while suddenly moved forward. The customers entered in an orderly manner and greeted that young human familiarly. Uncle, the door is open. Let's go, Jinx reminded. Louis retracted his gaze and followed the queue forward. For the sake of that child, he would not stoop to Jinx's level for the time being. However, when Louis and Jinx reached the door, they were stopped by a lady. Yabamiya smiled at the two of them and said, I'm sorry, dear customers. The designated hot pot area is full. If you don't mind, you can sit at that table for 4 over there. That's the only seat left. You want us to sit outside and eat? Louis frowned even before he looked at her. Uncle, this is that child, Jinx reminded softly. Louis's gaze landed on Yabamiya, and his eyes lit up immediately. He could not help but exclaim, She actually has such a pure bloodline. Yabamiya took half a step back instinctively. She recognized Jinx, but she was a little frightened by this uncle's expression. Is she serious when she took half a step back? Louis frowned slightly. He was the most respected chief and senior of the Golden Dragon tribe. Usually, the juniors would be full of smiles when they saw him. Why is Louis here? Elizabeth, who was standing at the back, saw Louis, and her expression changed slightly. She wanted to go forward, but after hesitating for a while, she stopped in her tracks. The Golden Dragon tribe probably would not hurt Mia, but if she appeared too close to Mia in front of them, it might cause her trouble instead. Mia, we have something to talk to you about in private, Jinx said to Mia with a smile. We intend to bring you home, Louis added with a nod. Sorry, I'm at work now. I don't have time to talk to you. Mia shook her head slightly and put on a smile again. Please take a seat, dear customers. The customers behind are still waiting. No pop-up window. Chapter 1742. Louis wanted to say something, but Jinx stopped him and pulled him to sit at one of the 4 tables at the side. What are you doing? Louis glanced at Jinx. Uncle, we can't rush this. This child is very stubborn. Let's sit down and have some food first. We'll talk to her privately when she's free later, Jinx said softly. You want me to wait for her? Louis frowned. You've seen it for yourself. Her royal bloodline is so pure. You can't find another junior with such a pure bloodline on Dragon Island. Jinx looked at Louis suspiciously. You really didn't do anything special with any lady in Chaos City all these years? You think this child has something to do with me? Lewis widened his eyes. Ahem. I'm just making a wild guess. Jinx coughed dryly. After all, apart from you, there aren't many in our Golden Dragon tribe who can pass down such a pure royal bloodline. Apart from this time, I haven't been to Chaos City for over 30 years. Lewis shook his head and looked at Yabamiya with a doubtful gaze. This child's Golden Dragon bloodline was indeed shockingly pure. Not to mention that she was only a half-dragon. Even the bloodline of the two WIRMS on Dragon Island would rarely reach such a pure level. The purer the bloodline, the easier it was to stimulate the potential of the bloodline, and the faster she could grow. Given this child's bloodline, it wouldn't be difficult for her to break through to the 10th tier in the future. She might even become the top powerhouse of the Golden Dragon tribe. We have to bring her back. There are fewer and fewer children with potential these years. I have to nurture her personally, Lewis said in a low voice. Yes, it's such a pity for such a seedling to wander outside. Jinx nodded in agreement. Uncle, can we share a table? Just then, a voice interrupted Lewis and Jinx's conversation. The two of them turned around at the same time, and their gazes landed on Harrison and George. Two humans made of fats. What did you call me? Uncle? Lewis narrowed his eyes, and a dangerous aura flashed across his eyes. Harrison and George felt a chill on their necks and subconsciously shrank their necks. However, they had no intention of retreating. Sharing tables was a tradition at Amy's, and it was only out of courtesy that they mentioned it. Now that there were only 2 seats left in the designated hot pot area, there was no reason for them to give up. Haha, it's fine. Have a seat. Before Lewis could flare up, Jinx had already invited the two of them to take their seats with a smile while winking at Lewis. Then we won't stand on ceremony. Harrison chuckled as he sat down beside Lewis. His voluptuous body took up more than half of the table. Lewis subconsciously moved to the side a little before coming back to his senses. I actually gave up my seat to an ordinary human? Thanks, Uncle Ha. He then looked at Lewis curiously and asked, the golden armor you're wearing is really extravagant. Which tailor shop did you get it custom made? Can someone of my size do it? The corners of Jinx's mouth twitched. He turned around silently and tried not to laugh. I'm afraid no tailor shop can make it, Lewis said coldly. That's true. I'm afraid the tailors in Chaos City don't have such skills. Harrison nodded in agreement. He retracted his head and moved his chair a little to the side. He could already feel that the atmosphere was a little cold. When they ate at Amy's, everyone would chat a little when they shared a table. If they hit it off, they would become partners, and they could even share a few drinks together the next time they ate. However, these two middle-aged men in flashy golden armor were obviously not part of this group, so he did not want to make a fool of himself. George also gave Harrison a look, hinting him not to say anything. He could tell that these two were not ordinary people. It would not be good if they accidentally got into trouble. Elizabeth held Yabamiya's hand gently and softly said, Don't be afraid. That person is the chief of the Golden Dragon tribe. He's not a bad person and won't hurt you. Mia nodded slightly. She thought for a while and said, But what if he wants to bring me back? What should I do? Elizabeth looked into her eyes and said, It's up to you whether you want to leave or not. All right. Mia nodded. The four of them just sat there and stared at each other. The atmosphere was a little strange. Harrison shifted his, but uncomfortably. If he had known, he wouldn't have been in such a hurry. Now, he even felt uncomfortable eating hot pot. Lewis began to reflect on why he had to squeeze at the same small square table with 2 humans for a meal. Furthermore, he was eating human food. What would you like to order? Right at this moment, a gentle voice sounded. Mia had arrived at the table with a smile on her face. Harrison wanted to say something, but he quickly shut his mouth. He turned to look at Lewis and Jinx and said, The two of you arrived first. Please order first. Jinx flipped open the menu. This was his first time eating hot pot. He couldn't help but frown when he saw the various dishes on the menu. Pig's brain? Can the brain of such a stupid creature be eaten? Wouldn't it be assimilated by it? Tripe? How dare they serve such a dirty thing on the table? Duck intestines? This restaurant is ridiculous. Louis was fuming with rage. Do you eat hot pot often? What's good? Jinx had already started to ask Harrison shamelessly before Louis flared up. If you're talking about eating hot pot, then you've asked the right person. Harrison patted his chest and said, based on my experience of eating hot pot for 28 meals a month, if your appetite is big enough, just order all the dishes on the menu. It'll be a regret in your life if you miss out on any one of them. This method of yours is really not troublesome at all. Jinx nodded. He looked at Yabamiya and said, then I'll order 2 servings of all the dishes on the menu. Louis raised his hand to reject him. You don't have to order for me. I won't eat such. Uncle, I've ordered. You can order whatever you want. Jinx turned around and interrupted Louis. How about you? What do you want? Yabamiya asked Louis with a smile. Louis retracted his hand awkwardly. He looked at Mia's clear eyes and hesitated for a while before saying, then I'll order 2 servings of all the dishes. All right, please give me a moment. Mia nodded. Then, she helped Harrison and George order. You've hidden your skills well. Harrison looked at the 2 of them with admiration. Chapter 1743. You've already become a vegetarian? Louis scrutinized Jinx. Uncle, it's right to try new things. Times have changed, Jinx said calmly. Vegetarian dishes should not be on a giant dragon's menu. I will hold a meeting with the elders to discuss whether giant dragons who eat vegetarian dishes should be banished from Dragon Island. Louis frowned. That child must have eaten quite a lot. Jinx pouted angrily. Louis choked and added, she hasn't returned to our tribe, so she can avoid punishment for not knowing the rules. But at least half of the dishes you ordered were vegetarian, Jinx said. Louis's face darkened. He looked at Jinx and said, do you think I can't lift my knife? Or did Chaos City give you special courage? Hey. Uncle, let's talk nicely. Jinx quickly gave in and chuckled. We are just doing as the Romans do. That child is very opinionated. She's not an orphan who will cry just because we say we're here to bring her home. We have to put in more effort. Eating vegetarian dishes is a way to get close to young people. If you don't want to try it, you are closing the door to interacting with young people. I think this child is not bad, too. I want to take her in as my disciple. Louis raised his eyelids and fell into deep thought. The hot pot and dishes were served very quickly. The 4-seater table was equipped with a 4-square pot. While it was clean and hygienic, it also prevented the awkward situation of accidentally taking away another person's meat and causing a bloody conflict. Your dishes are all here. There is a hot pot dining guide on the table. Please enjoy, Yabamiya said with a smile before leaving. Didn't they say that humans' cooking was very complicated? Why was the food served without cooking? Louis looked at the multi-level dining cart filled with all kinds of ingredients and fell into deep thought. That's it? It was obviously Jinx's first time dealing with such a situation. He looked at the duck intestines and duck blood soaked in ice water, as well as all kinds of fresh vegetarian dishes. It's your first time eating hot pot, right? Then, I suggest you read this hot pot dining guide seriously. The way to eat hot pot is simple and interesting, but there are still some tricks. Once you master them, you will be able to eat delicious hot pot on your own, Harrison reminded in a friendly manner. Louis averted his gaze and showed his disdain for this. As the honorable chief of the Golden Dragon tribe, his pride would never allow him to eat such lowly food. Jinx, on the other hand, accepted the hot pot guide and read it carefully. He was not ashamed to ask when he encountered something he did not understand. By the time the red oil in the pot was almost boiling, he had already grasped most of the theoretical knowledge of hot pot and made himself a mildly spicy dipping sauce. Then, he picked up a duck intestine with his chopsticks eagerly and prepared to have his first hot pot experience. Do you know that duck intestines are the internal organs of ducks? And you actually want to eat it now? Louis questioned Jinx spiritually. Jinx, who was originally eager to try, fell into deep thought after hearing Louis's words. He looked at the duck intestines swaying in his chopsticks. Crunched crunch, today's duck intestines are still so fresh and crispy. It's simply too wonderful, Harrison praised as he chewed on the duck intestine that he had just cooked happily. As he spoke, The second duck intestine was in the boiling red soup and slid into that plump mouth again. Crisp chewing sounds could be heard, followed by uncontrollable smacking sounds. Lewis and Jinx's throats moved at the same time. This is too wonderful. Jinx's eyes had completely lit up. The effect of the cold water that Lewis had poured on him was completely gone. I actually have a desire to eat duck intestine? Lewis, on the other hand, was deep in thought. For a giant dragon that had lived for almost 2,000 years, such a ridiculous thought was something that could not be ignored. Tripe is indeed my life. Meanwhile, George, who was at the side, was eating a plate of tripe and was very touched by himself. Uncle, I'll start first then, Jinx said to Lewis eagerly. Jinx couldn't wait to tell Lewis. He imitated Harrison and put the duck intestine in his hand into the boiling red soup pot. However, when he picked up his chopsticks again, the duck intestine was already gone. It's gone. Jinx was slightly taken aback. Yes, it's gone. Uncle, your duck intestine will lose its soul if it's gone for more than 3 seconds, Harrison said regretfully as he took a look. That won't do. Jinx used his sharp divine sense as a 10th-tier powerhouse and successfully picked up the duck intestine in the boiling soup in the next second. Then, he held his breath and focused on cooking the duck intestine. The 8th time, Jinx picked up his chopsticks from the pot and looked at the duck intestine that was hanging in the bright red soup. It had already turned from its original stretched-out state to a small curled-up section. He glanced at the hot pot instructions and then dipped the duck intestine into the dipping sauce with a sacred expression before putting it into his mouth. The spiciness of the hot pot base exploded on the tip of his tongue as if an ant had bitten it. Jinx's face turned red immediately, and he was so shocked that he almost jumped out of his chair. There's poison in the dish? Lewis looked a little alarmed. He had already raised his right hand and was ready to save him. Dregs, dregs, dregs. Right at this moment, Jinx suddenly started chewing quickly. The duck intestine made a crisp sound, and he could feel the refreshing feeling when his teeth cut through the thin duck intestine. The redness on Jinx's face gradually faded and was replaced by surprise and joy. Apart from the numbing spiciness, the crispy and chewy duck intestine gave Jinx's teeth a very novel and refreshing feeling. Moreover, as his taste buds got used to the spiciness, the fragrance under the spiciness started to show its power. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. Jinx swallowed the duck intestine and exclaimed, "What an incredible texture! What a shockingly delicious taste! This small piece of duck intestine has actually become such a delicious and special food after the ritual baptism of this red soup. It's really amazing." Lewis silently retracted his hand and frowned as he looked at Jinx, who had already picked up his second piece of duck intestine. His gaze was a little judgmental, with a tinge of anticipation and curiosity. The corners of Jinx's mouth twitched, and he continued to rinse the duck intestine. His exaggerated expression did not seem like something a dragon powerhouse should have. After rinsing the duck intestine, Jinx's target turned to the tripe soaking in the ice water. "Uncle, I know what this is. You don't have to remind me." Jinx looked at Lewis, who was about to speak with his mouth twitching. Then, he eagerly picked up a piece of tripe and scalded it in the hot pot. He skillfully dipped the red tripe into the dipping sauce and put it into his mouth with a satisfied expression. "This is the taste. It's on top of my head. No pop-up window." Chapter 1744. The crispy duck intestine and tripe went into his stomach with a crunch. The smooth pig brain was irresistible, the tender beef was covered in red oil, and the enoki mushrooms were floating in the pot. Jinx was already in a good mood. His forehead was full of sweat, and steam rose from the top of his head as though he was in a sauna. With a slurp, another bunch of enoki mushrooms went into that big mouth. Lewis turned his face away and swallowed his saliva for the 18th time. "Satisfying," Jinx praised. He picked up a plate of spicy beef and poured it all into the pot. He turned back to look at Lewis, who hadn't touched his chopsticks, and asked, "Uncle, are you really not going to try it?" As he spoke, his gaze had already drifted to the 2 plates of tripe and duck intestine on the dining cart beside Lewis. He chuckled and said, "Then, do you want me to help you finish these plates?" Jinx's hand was only halfway out when he was hit by a pair of chopsticks. He quickly retracted his hand and looked at Louis innocently as he said, "Uncle, I thought you didn't want to eat it?" "I don't want to eat such things," Louis said seriously. Louis said in all seriousness, however, "I've been looking for a suitable child all these years. I think I've found one now. In order to better understand the thoughts of young people, I've decided to sacrifice myself and try things that young people like nowadays." Jinx rolled his eyes. "So, do you want to eat some duck intestine or some pig brain first?" "Beef." Louis picked up a plate of beef and poured it into the pot. Then, he poured the entire plate of enoki into the pot as well. The enoki can only stay in the boiling pot for 5 seconds. You might not be able to get all of it in time. Before Harrison could finish his sentence, the enoki in the pot suddenly floated up and hovered above the pot at the height of a chopstick. Louis picked up a piece of enoki beef with his chopsticks and calmly picked up a piece of enoki beef that was covered in red oil. The rest of the enoki beef was still floating in the air. "Holy shit!" Harrison's eyes widened, and he looked at Louis in a different light. "This is a godly skill for eating hot pot." George was also amazed. The customers who were lining up at the side were also amazed. Everyone was looking for a way to cook 20 slices of enoki beef in one go and eat to their heart's content in one go at the same time. It actually appeared. It's just a small trick. Louis could feel the astonished gazes from around him, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He hesitated for a moment and still put the thin and curled piece of beef into his mouth. "What is this smell?" Louis's eyes lit up with red flames. His right hand subconsciously grabbed the corner of the table, and the wooden corner of the table instantly shattered into pieces. If Jinx hadn't stabilized the other side of the table in time and neutralized all the force, the entire wooden table would have been ruined along with the hot pot. "Calm down, it's not poison. It's a new smell. It's called spicy," Jinx quickly reminded him. Louis, who had a faint dragon horn on his forehead, finally regained control of his condition. The impact of the spicy aroma also receded a little, and the tender beef began to radiate its charm. WIRM's huge bodies and powerful abilities allowed them to go months without eating, but the amount they ate each time would be terrifying. Hence, they would usually choose larger magical beasts as their food. Beef was one of Louis's favorite foods, and he could eat 20 to 30 bison each time. Of course, that was the whole cow that had been butchered. It was his first time eating beef that had been sliced as thin as paper and was barely enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. But what surprised him was that apart from the discomfort he felt when he tasted the spicy aroma for the first time, the beef actually tasted a little special after the spicy aroma subsided. The texture of the tender beef was countless times finer than that of the whole cow. The huge difference between cooked beef and fresh beef shocked him. The beef tasted so delicious under the stimulation of the spicy aroma. This incredible taste! Louis couldn't help but exclaim. This wasn't the first time he had eaten cooked food, but this time, it swept away all the bad memories and impressions he had of cooked food. The chopsticks slid through the air, and the dozens of slices of enoki beef in the air all went into Louis's mouth in the blink of an eye. "It's a little too little." Louis smacked his lips as if he hadn't had enough. Harrison, who hadn't had time to shut his mouth, glanced at the hot pot and reminded, "The beef is done too?" "Very good." Louis picked up his chopsticks again, and the spicy beef immediately jumped out of the hot pot before he ate it piece by piece. "That's more like it." Louis put a piece of beef into his mouth. Compared to the enoki beef, the beef piece gave him a little more satisfaction. What kind of godly way is this? Is this the correct way to open a hot pot? Eyes, I've learned it. Hands, are you having sex? The surrounding crowd was full of praises. Uncle, did you come to eat without telling me? Jinx also looked at Louis suspiciously. Or are you a hot pot genius? Genius? Heh, there's no such thing as a genius in this world. There's only hard work that you can't see. Louis poured the 2 plates of duck intestines into the hot pot together, and then controlled them to float up and down in the hot pot. After 7 or 8 times, they were all fixed. Then, he picked up 3 to 5 pieces with his chopsticks and put them into his mouth. He chewed with a big mouthful, and the crisp sound seemed to bite into everyone's hearts. Tears of envy flowed down from the corners of their mouths unknowingly. Louis finished the duck intestines and poured in the 2 plates of tripe. He calmly said, "Of course, I'm an exception." Louis's hot pot eating skills shocked everyone. At the same time, it also stimulated the potential and creativity of many customers who were seriously eating the hot pot with their chopsticks. They all started to show their prowess and made the hot pot more interesting again. "Boss, should we stop them?" In the kitchen, Yabamiya asked softly as she looked at the ingredients flying in the air in the designated hot pot area worriedly. "No, this is the hot pot that's truly unique to the Norland continent. It's an interesting way of eating." Meg shook his head with a smile. As long as the customers still followed the restaurant's rules, he didn't want to interfere with how they ate the hot pot. That was their most basic freedom. Being able to try different ways of eating brought about different experiences. That was one of the reasons why people liked eating. "Uncle, I think some of the old rules can still be changed." Jinx looked at the empty dining cart beside Louis and smilingly said, "What do you think?" "I think it's not a big problem to eat some vegetables occasionally." Louis put the last piece of cabbage into his mouth. He looked up at Jinx and calmly said, "However, I don't think anyone will know that I've eaten it before." Jinx said. Chapter 1745. Goodbye, Boss Amy. Mia bade farewell to Meg and the rest before holding Elizabeth's hand and walking out of the restaurant. After a day of business, it was time for the night lessons again. However, as soon as the 2 of them walked out of the restaurant, Elizabeth let go of Mia's hand and consciously kept a distance from her. Mia looked at Elizabeth doubtfully. However, she soon noticed 2 burly men jumping out from the bushes at the side. "Little girl, we meet again," Louis said with a smile as he looked at Yabamiya. He glanced at Elizabeth and smiled kindly at her. "So Miss Elizabeth is here too. We haven't seen each other in a long time." "Hello," Elizabeth answered indifferently. Although the Golden Dragon tribe and the Frost Dragon tribe didn't get along well, Louis was her grandmother's elder. "But, are you really not the ones who are waiting for me?" Yabamiya asked suspiciously as she glanced at the bushes that had obviously been squatted on. "Yes, we are waiting for you." Louis nodded slightly with a smile. "We are here to bring you home. You are a child of the Golden Dragon tribe. You shouldn't be stranded in Chaos City, and you shouldn't be a waiter in a restaurant. Now, you should go home." Yabamiya took a step back instinctively. She shook her head at Louis and said, "I grew up in Chaos City. My mother is from Chaos City. I like Amy's, and I like being a waiter. This is my home." Louis looked at Yabamiya, who took a step back again, and his expression stiffened. As the first naturalized persuader, ever since he developed this homecoming tactic, he had been successful in every endeavor with the wandering golden dragons. He didn't expect to be defeated by this child. "Child, this is the chief of our Golden Dragon tribe. He is one of the most powerful people in this world. It is such an honor for him to personally bring you home. You are still young and don't understand. For a giant dragon's long lifespan of thousands of years, such restaurants will appear countless times in your life. You shouldn't waste your time on being a waiter. When you return to Dragon Island, you might even become the next chief of the Golden Dragon tribe." Jinx said earnestly. "Uncle, you said the same thing the last time you came to eat hot pot." Yabamiya shook her head slightly. "But that's not the case. There's only one Amy's, and she'll only appear once in my life. Besides, being a waitress isn't a waste of time. I think it's a very meaningful thing. You were here for hot pot before?" Louis turned to look at Jinx with a scrutinizing look. Jinx was a little embarrassed, and his gaze was a little evasive as he said, "I'm just trying to get some information." "Then why did you pretend to be trying it for the first time?" Was it because you said that a vegetarian giant dragon would be banished?" "I couldn't possibly self-destruct," Jinx said innocently. "He loves enoki mushrooms." "He ordered 10 servings of enoki mushrooms the last time," Yabamiya added. "Madam, please don't tell on me," Jinx begged with a bitter face. "I'll deal with you slowly when we get back." Louis glared at him before turning to look at Yabamiya. "Child, your golden bloodline is very pure. Do you know who your father is? Where is your mother? I've never seen my father before, and I don't know who he is. My mother has already passed away, Yabamiya said with a dejected expression. Lewis looked at Yabamiya pitifully and angrily said, If I find out who this bastard son is, I'll definitely teach him a lesson for you. Count me in. Jinx was equally indignant. Elizabeth, who was at the side, took a few deep breaths before slowly unclenching her fists. I like this job now. I like Amy's. I like Chaos City. So, I don't want to leave here. Yabamiya looked at Lewis with a troubled expression and said, But my powers seem to be getting stronger, and I don't know how to control them. At times like this, you need a powerful teacher, Lewis said. Someone like me. Jinx stepped forward without hesitation. Get lost. Lewis kicked Jinx away and smilingly said to Mia, Child, I can take you in as my disciple and personally guide you on the cultivation path of the Golden Dragon. Really? Yabamiya's eyes lit up. However, she soon worriedly said, But won't I have to leave the restaurant and go to the Dragon Island? Lewis looked at the conflicted Mia and pondered for a while before saying, As long as you acknowledge me as your master, if you really can't bear to leave this restaurant, I can give you 10 years. You can continue to stay here in these 10 years, and I will come to Chaos City once a month to teach you the cultivation method. What do you think? 10 years, Yabamiya pondered. She wanted to stay in the restaurant, but Lewis had already given her a huge concession. She instinctively looked at Elizabeth. Elizabeth nodded slightly. She was also shocked by Lewis's concession for Mia. With the guidance and protection of the Golden Dragon Tribe's #1 powerhouse, Mia's future would be smooth. She might even get that golden throne on the table. Seeing Elizabeth nod, Yabamiya finally made up her mind. She looked at Lewis and nodded vigorously. I'm willing. Good, good, good. Then, from today onwards, you will be my only disciple. Lewis looked at Yabamiya with satisfaction. He thought for a while and took off a golden gemstone ring from his thumb and passed it to her. This is? Yabamiya received it hesitantly. Lewis smiled and said, Master didn't specially prepare a gift for you this time. This is a space ring, and there are some small things inside. Take it as my gift for accepting you as my disciple. Yabamiya looked at the golden ring in her hand. Although she didn't know what was inside, she could guess that it had to be very precious. She looked up at Lewis and could feel the warmth and care in his eyes. It was the care of an elder. I have a master too? A master just like Aime's master. Yabamiya's mood suddenly became a little strange. She was an orphan who had never seen her father and had lost her mother at a young age. But now, she had a sister, friends, a job, and a master. Master, Yabamiya called out to Lewis as she clutched the ring tightly. Good disciple. Lewis nodded with satisfaction. He thought for a while and tore off a small piece from his golden armor. A golden light flashed, and it became a golden dragon scale the size of a fingernail. A thin golden necklace pierced through the dragon scale, and a dragon scale necklace appeared. Good disciple, wear this dragon scale necklace with you at all times. If you are attacked, it will automatically protect you. Also, it has my aura on it. Even those old things will be wary of it. Thank you, Master, Yabamiya said gratefully as she accepted the necklace. What a pity. She's such a good seedling. If I had known, I wouldn't have reported it. Jinx was already jealous. Chapter 1746. That's great. I have a master too. Big sister, do you think I can become as powerful as you in the future? Yabamiya had a ring on her finger and a golden necklace around her neck. She held onto Elizabeth's arm happily with a longing look on her face. Lewis and Mia agreed to start teaching her cultivation in a few days before leaving with Jinx. Your master is one of the most powerful beings on Dragon Island, and also the most powerful being on the Norland continent. With him teaching you personally and providing you with unlimited treasures, you will become more powerful than me in the future. Elizabeth looked at Yabamiya dotingly. The future is bright. Wow, that sounds great. Yabamiya's eyes sparkled. In that case, I will be able to protect you, big sister. Elizabeth stopped in her tracks and looked at Yabamiya with a smile. We will all become very powerful. No matter if it's the Golden Throne or the Frost Throne, we will be able to take back what father obtained back then. The Golden Throne? Yabamiya furrowed her brows slightly. Don't say anything later. Right at this moment, Elizabeth suddenly let go of Mia's hand and shielded her behind her at the same time. She looked at the empty street in front of her with a grave expression. Yabamiya looked ahead in confusion. There was nothing on the street, so why was Elizabeth so nervous? Come out, Great Elder, Elizabeth said with a cold expression. A hexagonal snowflake appeared on the ground in front of them, and a figure in an icy blue robe appeared. Elizabeth, why do you have to be so wary of me? Douglas said with a sigh. Father said that we must always be on our guard against our enemies and those who can watch us die, Elizabeth said calmly. Rankster's words are always refreshing. Douglas nodded slightly. Elizabeth was silent as she looked at him warily. Douglas's gaze went past her and landed on Yabamiya. Then, he couldn't help but ask, Little girl, who are you to Lewis? Yabamiya looked at Elizabeth and thought of her earlier instructions. She hid behind her better and didn't answer. She is Lewis's new disciple, Elizabeth answered for her. New disciple? Douglas was shocked. He had known Lewis for thousands of years and had never heard of him taking in a disciple. But he took in a new disciple in Chaos City? However, there was no mistaking Lewis's aura on the little girl. She must have received some sort of token from him to remind the old guys that she was under his protection. Douglas's gaze landed on Elizabeth again, and he said in a low voice, Go back. You still have a chance to sit on the Frost Throne. Is there a chance? A mocking smile appeared on Elizabeth's cold face. Do you think I should accept such charity gratefully? Douglas looked at Elizabeth and coldly said, Rankster's daughter doesn't need charity. The Frost Dragon tribe won't give charity to a tribesman. Since you don't want to go back now, I will wait for you to ascend the Frost Throne with your own abilities, just like your father did back then. The moment he said that, the frost dissipated, and Douglas disappeared too. He seems to have left. Yabamiya stepped forward and grabbed Elizabeth's hand gently. She then realized that her fingertips were cold, and her palm was a little damp. Let's go. Elizabeth's expression quickly returned to normal, and she held Yabamiya's hand as they walked forward. Is he the bad guy who almost killed Big Sister? Yabamiya asked carefully. No. Elizabeth shook her head slightly, but he's not a good person either. Yabamiya clenched her fists and said, Then let's wait until Mia becomes stronger before we go and defeat this guy. All right. Elizabeth's lips curled into a smile. The moonlight elongated their shadows as they walked forward hand in hand. At the entrance of the City Lord's castle, Josh alighted from the horse-drawn carriage and said to Dicus and the others, There was an accident on the way, so we arrived late. Sorry to trouble you all to welcome us. Please send my regards to City Lord Michael. I will definitely pay him a visit tomorrow. Dicus took out a gilded guidebook and handed it to Michael with a smile. You're too kind, Prince Josh. There will be staff members who will bring you, Princess Vanessa, and the rest to the villa to rest. Tomorrow's itinerary is also in this guidebook. You can take a look at it yourself. I'm so hungry. Vanessa stood behind Josh and clutched her stomach with an aggrieved expression. She looked at Dicus and asked, May I know if the City Lord's castle still provides dinner? After you've settled down, the City Lord's castle will prepare food and send it to your villas. Dicus nodded. I want to eat Mamie. Vanessa stopped mid-sentence. She thought to herself with resignation, What am I thinking? Mr. Mac must be coaxing Amy to sleep right now. He won't cook for me. As long as it's food. Thank you, Vanessa corrected herself. This way, please. A staff member led the Roth Empire's delegation into the City Lord's castle. Big Brother Josh, who were the people who ambushed us today? Why did they ambush us? When they returned to the villa, Vanessa came to Josh's room while waiting for dinner. She looked at Josh, who was sipping tea at the table, with a hint of lingering fear on her face. We still can't confirm which power they belong to, but I've already sent someone to report this to Royal Father. I believe we'll be able to get to the bottom of this very soon, Josh replied calmly. How despicable. How dare they ambush us? Luckily, we have more people, and President Richard came with us, Vanessa said angrily as she clenched her fists. Don't worry, I'll protect you. Josh said to Vanessa with a smile. Vanessa nodded. Then, she looked at Josh with a smile and said, now that we've arrived at Chaos City, I can move around freely from tomorrow onwards, right? I haven't seen Uncle Abraham for a long time. I want to pay him a visit. Sure. I'll get someone to send you over tomorrow. Josh nodded. He flipped open the schedule on the table and calmly said, I see that the schedule says that we'll have a meeting at Mamie's tomorrow. A meeting at Mamie's? Vanessa's eyes lit up, and she immediately came forward. The first line of the schedule was indeed to have breakfast and a meeting at Mamie's. The meeting would last for one day. I think it's all right for me to visit Uncle Abraham later. As an important member of the Roth Empire's delegation this time, I think it's very important for me to attend the meeting on the first day to showcase the glory of the Roth Empire, Vanessa said seriously. Yes, that's it. Chapter 1747. Shouldn't vampires live in castles? What is this? A bungalow? You're the vampire princess, Countess Bartoli, and the niece of the new vampire ancestor. How can you let yourself suffer like this? Dracula said to Camilla with a pained expression as he stood in the middle of the yard. I'm sick of living in a dark castle. Now, the rich people in Chaos City are living in villas with big yards. Camilla rolled her eyes as she hugged the black cat and said, do you know how much I spent on this house? A total of 300 million copper coins. If I were to go to the mountains outside the city, I could build 10 castles with this amount of money. 300 million. Dracula's eyes widened as he looked around. The scenery was indeed not bad. The yard was facing a small lake. Although the two-story house was not as grand as a castle, the design was quite novel and unique. Where did you get so much money from? Dracula looked at Camilla suspiciously. I'm the vampire princess, Countess Bartoli, and the niece of the new vampire ancestor. Camilla chuckled and said, can't I borrow money if I don't have it? You can do that? Dracula's eyes widened. I borrowed it in the name of the vampires. Anyway, that old fellow sold me out twice. I'll just take it as my interest, Camilla said matter-of-factly. Dracula nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like it's quite legitimate. Of course. Am I the kind of woman who can be sold off so easily? No. Dracula shook his head. You're a woman worth 300 million. But why are you representing the vampires in this meeting, Uncle? Isn't that person usually the most enthusiastic about such things? Camilla looked at Dracula with confusion. Because I'm all grown up now. He can't defeat me. Dracula smiled smugly. Even his shoulders started to shake uncontrollably. Indeed, the fist is the law. Camilla's lips curled up crazily as if she could already imagine that scene. But, Uncle Dracula, I heard a rumor about you in Chaos City, Camilla said to Dracula with a strange expression. I've only just become a patriarch. Have the rumors of my handsomeness already spread to Chaos City? Dracula took out a glass of red wine from somewhere and took a sip. He sighed and said, it's really lonely. No. It's about the rumors about you eating grass for money. Camilla shook her head. Dracula's expression froze as he turned around to look at Camilla in disbelief. How did you know? It's just a rumor I heard by chance. Camilla shrugged. Who else knows? Dracula's voice was filled with killing intent. Irina. Camilla did not hide anything. Sigh. This girl doesn't have any sense of confidentiality with her partners. Dracula sighed deeply. But I'm very curious. How many tickets did you collect back then? Camilla asked curiously. It's a secret. Dracula shook his head. Then, did you really agree to her for money back then? Camilla asked. Of course not. How could a vampire with noble character like me do something like that for money? Dracula said seriously. It's just to return a favor. As if I'd believe you. Camilla rolled her eyes. Dracula. A figure appeared on the wall behind the villa and smiled at Dracula. I heard you came to Chaos City. You're indeed here. Your partner is here, so I won't disturb you. Camilla carried the cat into the villa very tactfully. It's been so many years, but Irina is still so beautiful. Dracula smiled at Irina, who jumped down from the wall. Irina walked around Dracula and clicked her tongue in wonder. I didn't expect you to still be so greasy after becoming a patriarch. This is called gentlemanly, not greasy, Dracula retorted seriously. Gentlemanly equals perverted. Have times changed? A warm-hearted gentlemanly is such a beautiful adjective. How can it be equated with perverted? Yes, times have changed. I'm here to collaborate with you this time. Why don't we set up a vampire patriarch herbivore exhibition together? Let's treat it as a 10-year anniversary event. You've become the famous patriarch of the vampires this time, so the price of the tickets can be multiplied a few times. Also, with the convenient transportation in Chaos City, the tickets will definitely sell well, Irina encouraged. Really? Dracula's eyes lit up, and he was eager to try it out. However, he quickly came back to his senses. He took a sip of wine, tidied his clothes, and seriously said, "No, I'm representing the vampires now. If I do something like that again, I'll be embarrassing the vampires. Furthermore, I've already become a patriarch. Do I still lack that bit of ticket money? Let's set the price at 1,000 copper coins per ticket. If 100,000 people come, that'll be 100 million copper coins. No, all right? That's not very good. Chaos City has a population of 1 million, and it's connected to all the major races. The floating population is more than the fixed population. If 1 million people come to watch the exhibition, we'll earn 1 billion copper coins just from the tickets alone. If we launch the Patriarch Herbivore series and sell it at 1,000 copper coins per ticket, we'll earn even more. That'll be 10 billion copper coins. Isn't it 2 billion? That's not important. What's important is that it's a lot of money, Irina said with a smile. No, it's too much. I have to think about how to spend this money. First, I'll build a big castle, and then I'll have a bunch of maids. This life is wonderful. Dracula's lips curled up crazily as he started to imagine the beautiful life in the future. Camilla, who was eavesdropping at the door, was shocked. That works too? Irina continued. Now that the whole continent's attention is on Chaos City, let's make an announcement first. I've even thought of the exhibition name. It'll be called World's Most Powerful Vampire Patriarch Herbivore Diary 10th Anniversary Touring Exhibition. Isn't that good? It sounds pretty cool. Dracula nodded. Although he felt that something was not right, he somehow felt that it was not bad. All right, that's settled then. I'll go back and get them to prepare the poster. See you tomorrow. Irina waved and left. Hey, we haven't discussed how to split the profits. Dracula quickly said after he came back to his senses. Uncle, you're not really planning to hold another herbivore exhibition, are you? Camilla opened the door and looked at Dracula strangely. Cough, cough. Child, how can this be called a herbivore exhibition? This is a health exhibition to promote a healthy lifestyle. Dracula coughed dryly and said seriously, do you know why I was able to become the first vampire to break through and become an ancestor in the past 1,000 years? Herbivore is a very important key. Chapter 1748. In a dark secret chamber, an oil lamp was lit on a square table. A muscular dwarf and an old goblin sat on both sides of the square table. There was only a bottle of wine, 2 cups, and a handful of peanuts on the table. The dwarf took a big gulp of wine and loudly said, Isen Castle has already closed all the entrances and exits and sent all the people from the other races back. Even if the racial war starts again, we are confident that the Isen Castle will not be breached. To us goblins, the war is just a different way of earning money. The trading of weapons and food will increase greatly during the war. Since 5 years ago, we have already accumulated enough food, and we can sell your weapons to every place that needs them. The old goblin smiled, revealing his yellowish-black teeth, but the giant dragon seemed to be too concerned about the peace talks this time. The racial war will hardly involve them, so why are they so concerned? They have always been dismissive of the other races. The dwarf poured himself some wine with a frown. I can't guess what those blockheads are thinking now, the goblin said with a smile. The goblin smiled and said, if we can have another 100 years of peace, it will also be a good thing for our 2 races. The railway built by Chaos City and my race has already completed its first trial run. Although I haven't taken it before, I heard from them that it's a huge train that can run as long as it eats coal, and it will never get tired. It should change the current transportation method and bring about new trade opportunities. Although the demons and orcs have been in chaos recently, the Roth Empire will not give up the chance to start a war so easily. The speed at which humans have become powerful in the past 100 years is astonishing. Just one Alex is enough to make many giant dragons tremble in fear. But there is only one Alex in the past 100 years. Moreover, the Roth Empire has pushed him to the opposite side personally. The goblin smiled and said, "He and Irina are on Chaos City's side now." "Then, which side are you goblins on this time?" the dwarf asked the goblin. "We will always be on the side of benefits." The goblin was still smiling. On the first floor of the restaurant, Meg, who was sitting by the window, put down the book in his hand and looked at Irina, who had appeared in the restaurant. He said, "Amy is already asleep. Do you want to eat something?" Irina thought for a moment and said, "We can have some crayfish and beer. It would be even better if we had some skewers." "Okay, take a seat and rest for a while." Meg got up and walked to the kitchen, taking an apron and putting it on. "I want to watch you cook." Irina followed him to the kitchen door. She leaned against the door frame and looked at him with a smile. Meg first lit up the barbecue rack and put in the fruit charcoal to wait for the fire to burn up. Then, he took a net and scooped up 2 crayfish from the fish tank. He looked back at Irina and said, "How many do you want to eat?" 2 spicy crayfish, Irina answered without hesitation, looking at the beautiful smile on her face, which vaguely had a hint of girlish shyness. Meg actually felt that she was a little cute. He wanted to. Meg scooped up 2 more crayfish for himself and considered whether he should order some oysters from the system. Carbon-grilled oysters, a man's gas station, a woman's beauty salon. Top-quality deep-sea oysters, 1,000 copper coins each. Hurry up if you want to buy. The system's voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. You can only fool children with this kind of nonsense. Meg rolled his eyes. Host, this is based on traditional Chinese medicine. According to the Compendium of Materia Medica, oysters can, half price. I'll take 2 dozen. Meg directly interrupted the system. Deal. The system said readily. Ding. 24 oysters have been delivered. 12,000 copper coins have been deducted. Meg looked at the extra 2 dozen oysters in the corner of the water tank and reached out to pick them up. The oysters were of equal size, each the size of an adult's palm, and their shells were as white and clean as shells. He wondered if oysters that grew in the deep sea were as clean as this. "What are these?" Irina stepped forward and asked curiously. "These are oysters. I bought them during the day. It's said that they taste good when grilled," Meg answered. He took the fat head fish and started to process the shrimp and oysters. Grilled oysters had to have a name in the barbecue world. A mouthful of fresh grilled oysters with garlic was Meg's favorite. That taste was unforgettable even now when he thought about it. If you say it's not bad, then it's definitely not wrong. Irina nodded. She leaned against the door and looked at Meg, who was processing the ingredients, and said, "I want to see 2 people today." "Who did you see?" "I saw Josh from afar. That old dog Richard was by his side, so I didn't make a move. However, they were attacked by a group of mysterious people on their way here. There were 2 10th-tier powerhouses among them. They seemed to be from the demon tribe. I couldn't see clearly from afar, but I didn't succeed," Irina said. "Sean won't be so stupid as to attack Josh at this juncture. However, if Josh were to die in an accident, it would cause quite a stir in the Roth Empire," Meg said with a smile. "It's a good thing. Josh has 2 great magic casters and a 10th-tier knight following him on this trip. It's not easy to assassinate him." Irina pursed her lips. "Then let's keep him alive for a while longer. If he were to die now, Sean would become the only successor. The Roth Empire would start a war sooner or later. His ambition is greater than Josh's." Meg put the processed crayfish aside. He poured the oil into the big pot and heated it until it was 70% hot. He poured in the ginger and garlic that he had prepared earlier and stir-fried them. Then, he sprinkled in a bunch of dried chili, pepper, and other spices to stir-fry. The spicy aroma gradually thickened. The crayfish was put into the pot, and the fire was turned on. He held the big spatula in one hand and the big pot in the other. After stir-frying, the blackish-green crayfish gradually turned red, and the aroma also gradually thickened. At this time, he poured in 2 big glasses of beer, covered the pot, and waited for the spicy crayfish to be ready. When it was time for the crayfish to be ready, Meg took out a piece of mutton from the fridge and chopped it into small cubes. He skewered it with a bamboo stick, brushed a thin layer of oil on the hot grill, and placed a big bunch of mutton skewers on the grill. The moment the mutton with some fatty meat was placed on the grill, the oil started to sizzle, and the aroma of the grilled mutton gradually spread. While he was grilling the mutton, Meg also found a gap to pry open the oyster shell. Perhaps it was because it came from the deep sea, but the oyster looked very clean inside and out. The oyster meat was juicy, and a faint smell of the sea wafted over. It was fresh as if it had just been fished out from the sea. A type of shell? Irina asked curiously. Yes, you can understand it that way. Meg nodded. He placed the opened oysters on the grill one by one, and then began to make minced garlic. Controlling the kitchen that fed hundreds of people all by himself allowed Meg to practice the ability to multitask. Now, he was cooking 3 types of food at the same time, and even had to prepare the ingredients himself. Yet, he was still able to do it smoothly without any mess. Instead, he had the calmness of flowing water. My man is indeed capable in both the hall and the kitchen. Irina, who was standing at the kitchen door, nodded with satisfaction. Chapter 1749. He scooped a spoonful of the prepared garlic sauce and sprinkled it on the oysters. Then, he sprinkled a few chopped choutillon peppers, and the fresh aroma gradually spread. It smells so good. Irina's eyes lit up as she looked at the oysters that were decorated with bright garlic sauce. The juices were jumping under the charcoal fire, and it was mouth-watering. Meg flipped the mutton skewers, sprinkled various spices, and placed them directly on a long plate. Then, he sprinkled a handful of tender green onions. At the same time, the spicy crayfish on the side was almost ready to be juiced. 4 large crayfish were placed on a large plate, and then the first batch of oysters on the grill was placed on the plate. Let's grill the rest later. Meg handed the oysters and crayfish to Irina. Then, he took 2 glasses of beer and walked out of the kitchen with the grilled skewers. The 3 large plates almost took up the entire table. The bright red spicy crayfish held up their large broken pincers, the mountain of mutton skewers sprinkled with green onions, and the neatly arranged oysters were juicy. Together with the large glasses of beer, such a supper was simply amazing. Apart from Josh, who else did you see? Mag asked casually as he took a sip of his wine. Dracula. This time, he represented the vampires at the conference. I have already made an appointment with him to hold another grass-eating exhibition. Let's take advantage of the limelight of this conference and sell a batch of advance tickets first. Irina broke off a large pincer and said as she peeled the shell. He agreed. Meg was surprised. One had to know that Dracula was now one of the only 2 ancestors of the vampires. His status was incomparable to that of the past. Back then, he agreed to it for 1 million copper coins. This time, our goal is 2 billion copper coins. How can he refuse? I've even come up with a name. It'll be called 10th Anniversary Exhibition of the Diary of the Strongest Vampire on the Surface. Not bad, right? Irina said with a smile. The name is not bad. Meg raised his eyebrows. However, Jay-Cho wouldn't dare to say that he could earn 2 billion from a concert tour. Where did they get their confidence from? Irina quickly finished a prawn pincer and picked up an oyster. This shell smells so good. Irina smelled it first. The fresh smell mixed with the garlic fragrance wafted to her face. The golden garlic mixed with red pepper and green onions covered the surface. Use your chopsticks to scoop up the base and eat it with the gravy. Mag also picked up an oyster and demonstrated how to eat oysters for Irina. The fresh oyster meat was soft, and the fresh juice immediately splashed in the mouth. Of the roasted, of the garlic, the spicy, of the spicy taste, and brought the taste, bringing pleasure, bringing the taste of the taste of the taste of the taste of the taste, of the taste of the taste, of the taste of the taste of the taste of the taste. This was the first time that Meg had roasted an oyster by himself. However, the garlic was made with the recipe of the garlic crayfish, the heat of the beef kebab and mutton kebab, and the top-quality oyster were still the best. After swallowing the oyster, Meg also drank the remaining soup in the shell. Then, he picked up the wine glass and took a big gulp. His eyebrows gradually relaxed. It does look good. Irina also learned to use the chopsticks to pick up the oyster meat. However, it was a little difficult for her to eat the fat oyster meat in one bite, so she opened her mouth and ate half of it. The sweet and fresh taste exploded in the mouth with the soup, and the taste buds danced. This was a fresh taste that could only be tasted at the seaside. It was as if it had just been fished out of the sea and then put on the grill. That smooth and wonderful taste was like tofu pudding. With a light bite, it almost melted in the mouth. Within the hard shell, there was actually such a soft interior, which almost made people melt. The special minced garlic fragrance bloomed, giving the oyster an even more delicious taste. The taste buds on the tip of the tongue were already addicted to it. The spiciness was like a finishing touch, as if it was reminding her to eat the remaining half of the oyster quickly. Slurp. The other half of the oyster meat also entered Irina's mouth, and the soup on the shell was also sucked away. Ah, what a satisfying taste! Irina, who had taken a big gulp of the beer, put down the wine glass and praised with a satisfied expression. "Do you like it?" Meg picked up the mutton kebab and asked with a smile. "It can't be better. I never thought that shells could be so delicious." Irina nodded her head, and her eyes were curved like crescent moons. "Then I'll roast another dozen for you later," Meg said with a pampering tone. "Okay." Irina already couldn't wait to pick up the second roasted oyster. "Oomph, you're actually eating supper behind my back." Right at this moment, a soft voice with a hint of anger sounded from the direction of the stairs. Meg and Irina froze in their actions at the same time and looked back. Amy rubbed her sleepy eyes and stood at the stairs, looking at them and the table of delicacies in disbelief. She pursed her lips and was as aggrieved as she could be. Ugly Duckling poked its head out from beside her feet. Its eyes were half closed, and it also looked sleepy. Amy, it's not what you think." Meg stood up with an awkward expression. The little fellow was usually sound asleep. Why did she wake up today? "I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Father just wants to eat supper with Mother. He just doesn't want to ask Amy to eat with him." Amy turned her head away and said aggrievedly, "Come here, Amy. Your father roasted some super delicious shells today. Let's eat them together as a family of 3. Irina smiled and waved at Amy. "Roasted shells? Are they really super delicious?" Amy's eyes turned around unconsciously. She looked at the rows of shells on the table and secretly swallowed her saliva. "Of course. If you don't believe me, I can eat them and show you." Irina picked up an oyster and put it into her mouth. Then, she chewed with satisfaction. "All right, then I'll forgive you on account of the delicious shells." Amy ran over, pulled out a chair, and sat down between Meg and Irina. "You can't eat the shells." Meg smiled and brought her a plate and a pair of chopsticks. Then, he took an oyster and put it in front of her. As long as there was good food, there was no child easier to coax than Amy. "What a big shell. It's as big as my face." Amy held the oyster with both hands and exclaimed in surprise. She first took a sip of the soup, then picked up the oyster with her chopsticks and took a bite. Her big blue eyes lit up instantly. She chewed happily and swallowed. Then, she took another bite. Just like a little squirrel, she finished the oyster in a short while. "This is too delicious," Amy said happily as if she had discovered a new world while holding the oyster shell and licking it. Chapter 1750. Both Irina and Amy liked the roasted oysters, so Meg ordered another 2 dozen from the system and roasted a big prawn while he was at it. Golden minced garlic covered the plump oyster meat, and some chopped green onions and chili sprinkled on top. He put them into his mouth together with the broth and savored the rich garlic and oyster meat. This was indeed a wonderful taste that no one could resist. "Meow, meow." Ugly Duckling knelt in front of an empty oyster shell and looked up at Meg with a hopeful look in its eyes. "Ugly Duckling, you can't eat too much food with strong flavors. You'll shed your fur." Meg peeled off a piece of roasted prawn pincer and put it into the oyster shell. Meow, Ugly Duckling lowered its head and ate, and let out a happy whimper. Ugly Duckling, you can't eat too much food. If you're too heavy, you'll shed more than just your fur. Amy held a spicy prawn pincer in her hand and stuck her head out to remind it. Meow, Ugly Duckling turned its head in another direction and continued eating, pretending not to have heard her. I'm so full. Amy put the last bite of prawn meat into her mouth and took a tissue to wipe her hands and mouth. She touched her slightly bulging little tummy with satisfaction. Meg's little tummy is filled with a lot of food, Meg said with a smile as he stroked her head. Amy didn't want to eat so much at first, but Father's food was too delicious, so I couldn't control myself, Amy said with a pout. Then, is Meg still angry with Father? Meg looked into Amy's eyes and asked carefully. Of course not. You're Amy's best father. How could Amy be angry with you? Amy put her arms around Meg's neck and then kissed him on the cheek. You're also Father's best baby. Meg smiled like a 1.8-meter child. But next time, you can't sneak a midnight snack behind my back. You have to bring me along. Amy looked at Meg with a serious expression. Okay. Next time, the two of us will eat secretly. Meg smiled dotingly. Hey, the main wife is still here. Irina crossed her arms and looked at the father and daughter with a smile. Exactly. Amy leaned into Irina's arms and winked at Meg. Of course we'll bring Mother along. We want to eat together as a family of 3. Meg immediately realized that he was getting carried away. He quickly nodded and said, Yes, let's eat together as a family of 3. Can we go and look at the stars? I've never looked at the stars with Father and Mother before. Amy looked at the two of them with anticipation written all over her face. Of course. Meg looked at Amy with a hint of guilt in his heart. As their identities hadn't been announced yet, their family of 3 had never appeared in public. During this period of time, he and Irina were both very busy, and they rarely had the chance to spend time together as a family of 3. Let's go and look at the stars. Irina waved her hand, and the small mountain of plates and trash on the table all floated into the kitchen. The tableware was washed and put into the cupboard, and the table looked brand new. Then, she took Amy's little hand and walked toward the stairs. Meg picked up Ugly Duckling and took a thick blanket from the second floor. The balcony on the third floor was naturally the best spot for stargazing. Amy sat in the middle while Meg and Irina sat on either side of her. Ugly Duckling jumped onto Amy's lap and snuggled up comfortably. They were all wrapped up in a thick blanket. The family of 3 and a cat leaned against the back of the chair and looked up at the starry sky at the same time. But there are clouds. Amy was a little disappointed. A black cloud just happened to float over Chaos City, obscuring a large part of their vision. They could only see a few scattered stars between the clouds. It was clearly not a suitable night for stargazing. It's all right. It's just a cloud. Irina took out her magic caster's staff and pointed it at the sky. A beam of golden light pierced through the black night sky and disappeared into the black cloud. Following a sudden clap of thunder, the thick black cloud above Chaos City dissipated at a rate visible to the naked eye, revealing a deep blue sky with stars twinkling in it. Wow, Mother, you're awesome. Amy looked at this scene with elation. She hugged Irina's neck and kissed her. She pointed at the sky excitedly and said, I've never seen such a clean and bright sky before. Actually, Meg opened his mouth, but self-consciously swallowed the rest of his words. This was not something that anyone could do. Even if he had recovered to the 10th tier, he still wouldn't be able to fly into the sky and slash apart the clouds with his sword. However, looking at the happy Amy and the satisfied Irina, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up into a smile. The moon looks so small, and it turns into a crescent moon one moment, and then into a flatbread the next. Did Big Sister Barbara really live on the moon in the past? Could it be that she would become a little person after returning to the moon? Amy quickly stared at the moon and curiously asked, The moon is very far away from us, so it looks small, but it's actually very big. The people living there are the same size as us. The size of the moon shouldn't change. It's just that the part that we see changes due to the change in light. Meg explained with a smile. Of course, he was talking about Earth's moon. He didn't know if it was applicable in this world yet. Oh, Amy nodded thoughtfully. Then, she curiously asked, then, if Big Sister Barbara kept flying towards the moon, would she be able to return home? Those who tried to fly to the moon and didn't give up midway should all be dead. Irina shook her head. There's a barrier tens of thousands of meters high in the sky that we can't break through. Once we pass through that barrier, even 10th-tier powerhouses won't be able to breathe. That's why it's also called the death barrier. That's so scary. Amy shrunk her neck. At times like this, we need a spaceship, Meg thought to himself. Then, how can Big Sister Barbara go home? Amy asked worriedly. Unless the Moon Nation can repair and reactivate the teleportation portal, she can only stay on the Norland continent. Irina shook her head slightly. It would be a good thing if the teleportation portal to the Moon Nation could be reopened as soon as possible. Perhaps they're the only place that has preserved the ancient text and spell formation legacy. Currently, we still have no idea how to repair the spell formation. Irina turned to look at Meg. Hope is slim. Meg looked up at the full moon. Pinning their hopes on the moon that was hundreds of kilometers away didn't seem very reliable. I'm so happy to be able to watch the stars with Father and Mother. It would be great if we could do this more often in the future. Amy didn't understand the conversation between the two of them. She just grabbed their hands happily. We'll watch the stars with Amy often in the future. Meg held Amy's hand gently as he looked at the mother and daughter pair with doting eyes. Your Majesty, the spell formation has been repaired and reinforced. We're going through the final adjustments and confirmations. Your Majesty, the elite Vanguard team has been assembled. The most outstanding spell formation masters, magic casters, and warriors of the Moon Nation are all in place. They're ready to enter the teleportation portal at any time. Your Majesty, please reconsider. The Vanguard team might encounter some dangers and difficulties. We sincerely ask Your Majesty not to put yourself in danger for the sake of the Moon Nation. The warriors of the Moon Nation will definitely rescue Her Highness. In the underground palace of the Moon Nation, several officials were kneeling on the ground as they tried to persuade the king. I've made up my mind. I must personally lead the Vanguard team into the teleportation portal. No matter what's on the other side of the teleportation portal, I will personally bring Barbara back. The king waved his sleeves and solemnly said, I am the king of the Moon Nation and also a father. Chapter 1751. Thunderstorm Mountains, Underground Cave. The situation isn't looking good. According to the current progress, it's very difficult for us to decipher all the runes of the spell formation before the seal loses its effect completely, let alone reinforce and reseal it in the limited time. Novan sighed with melancholy in his eyes. Barbara also sighed dejectedly. However, she unwillingly said, there are only a few dozen runes left. Can't we do some basic reinforcement first? The spell formation is a whole. If we don't completely understand this spell formation and then repair and reinforce it as a whole, any changes might cause the seal spell formation to collapse. Novan shook his head. This spell formation is far more complicated than many of the spell formations today. We can't do anything to it easily. Hee. The great old one's sinister laughter sounded as if they were mocking their futility. Don't be smug. If my master was here, he would reseal you in minutes. You won't even have the chance to jump around. Barbara roared at the octopus monster angrily. The secret meeting of the various races will be held tomorrow. Michael intends to let the various races' representatives see this octopus monster personally so that they won't continue to wage war and work together to fight against the devils that might exist all over the Norland continent that are about to break the seal. Novan looked at the octopus monster in the seal with a grave expression. This might be a war that's even more tragic than the racial war. I would like to see the reaction of those fellows when they see this big fellow. It should be quite interesting, Crassus said with a smile, but he didn't appear too worried. If there's no substantial progress by tomorrow, I'm going back to tutor little Amy, Julian said with a cold expression. Crassus turned to look at Julian with narrowed eyes. You want to tutor Amy secretly? Not only do I want to tutor her, but I also want to give her homework. Little Amy's ice magic should be about to break through to the 7th tier now, Julian said calmly. Wow, you're too much. We have the same apprentice, and I never gave Amy any homework in order to give her a happy childhood. How dare you secretly give her homework? Crassus said angrily. As a substitute teacher, Cece should be good at teaching theoretical knowledge, Julian continued calmly. You're still looking for a substitute teacher? Crassus stomped his foot and turned around to walk out of the cave. Grandpa Crassus, where are you going so late at night? Barbara asked. I'm going to tutor Amy, Crassus said without looking back. Based on Amy's habits, she should be asleep by now. Are you going to wake her up for tutoring? Barbara said with a smile. Don't blame me for being rude if you dare to disturb my apprentice's sleep, Julian said coldly. Crassus stopped in his tracks. After hesitating for a while, he still walked back. I'm not scared of you. I just want little Amy to study happily. However, a good apprentice like little Amy who loves to study will definitely practice her fire magic, well, even if I don't give her homework. I don't need to study. I just need to eat, and play every day. It's so fun. I can also watch the stars with father and mother. The holidays are so great. I love holidays. Amy, who had already fallen asleep in Meg and Irina's arms, murmured, Looks like our little genius also likes winter holidays without homework, Meg said with a smile as he wrapped Amy in a blanket. Irina looked at him with a faint smile and softly said, When everything is settled, let's continue with the restaurant. Meg looked at her with a gentle light in his big blue eyes. He smiled gently and said, You like being the lady boss? Compared to being the elven queen, I think being a lady boss who collects money is pretty good. Irina nodded seriously. I think being a boss is pretty good too. Meg nodded with a smile. Is it there? Josh stood in front of the window and looked toward the northwest with a demonic red glow in his eyes. The shadow under the moonlight gradually wriggled into the shape of a skull and said in a bewitching voice, As long as you release it, you will obtain endless power. When everything is settled tomorrow, I will go there. Josh nodded slightly, and his smile gradually became sinister. I will become the most powerful person on the Norland continent. I will crush Alex, and I will make Irina come back to my side. As long as you have our help, even giant dragons can only crawl at your feet. After a warm night, Mag got out of bed gently. He glanced at the two beauties who were still sleeping soundly under the blankets, covered them with the blankets, and tiptoed out of the door. Today was the restaurant's legal rest day, but he had already promised City Lord Michael to be the venue for the first day of the Various Races Congress, so he still had to wake up earlier to prepare. Usually, only breakfast was served in the morning. However, in order to satisfy the various races representatives, Meg decided to open up the entire menu except 4 Buddha jumps over the wall, including hot pot and barbecue. Breakfast was available for all. Meg came out of the bathroom after washing up and bumped into Gina, who had been standing at the door for some time. The latter's body was unsteady, and she instinctively wrapped her legs around him. Luckily, Meg reacted quickly. He reached out to hold her shoulders and moved his body to the side a little to avoid that long leg. Boss. Gina steadied herself and rubbed her forehead that had bumped into Meg's chest. Her tender and fair face blushed slightly. Boss is so handsome every morning. Meg let go of his hand and smilingly asked, Gina, why are you up so early? Gina snapped back to her senses and quickly said, Boss, I have something to tell you. Is it about the Lantis delegation? Gina nodded and said, Yes. The High Priest sent Little Fishy to contact me last night. He will personally lead the Lantis delegation to attend the meeting, but they didn't receive an official invitation. I wonder when would be a suitable time to appear. Have they arrived at Chaos City already? Yes, they arrived last night. However, the High Priest said that he didn't want to disturb your rest, so he didn't come to see you immediately. Meg pondered for a while and said, Let them wait near the restaurant. I will inform them when the time is right. All right. Gina nodded and went back to her room. Meg knew that the merfolk had a special way of transmitting information, so he didn't pay much attention to it and went downstairs. Ding. Meg had just put on his apron when the doorbell rang. Who's here so early? Meg walked to the door. Phyllis and Camilla wouldn't be coming today, and the others wouldn't come so early. Chapter 1752. Boss, do you see any changes in me today? Yabamiya jumped in happily as soon as Meg opened the door. She looked at Meg expectantly. Meg sized up Yabamiya. Mia was still as petite and adorable as ever in her maid uniform. Her energetic smile brightened his mood. His gaze lingered on her chest for a moment, and the fabric seemed to have tightened again. He hesitated for a moment before asking, "You've grown a little?" "Compared to yesterday, I should have grown a little taller, but that's not the most important thing. What about the other changes?" Yabamiya continued to ask. Meg had actually already sensed the powerful giant dragon aura on Yabamiya's body. It was similar to the aura of one of the two giant dragons that came to the restaurant yesterday. His gaze fell on the golden necklace in front of her chest. The pendant of the necklace was a golden dragon scale the size of a pea. The aura was coming from there. "You've become prettier," Meg said with a smile. "Really?" Yabamiya blushed. An honest and upright person like her boss would definitely not lie. However, she quickly realized that she wasn't here for Meg to appraise her appearance. She grabbed the necklace in front of her chest and excitedly said, "I became a disciple yesterday. A very powerful master." A disciple? Meg was a little surprised. He knew that the Golden Dragon tribe wanted to recruit Yabamiya back to the Dragon Island, but he didn't expect the leader of the Golden Dragon tribe to accept Mia as his disciple. Yabamiya nodded and said, "Yes. My master said he's the chief of the Golden Dragon tribe and promised to give me 10 years to continue to stay in Chaos City as a waitress." "Congratulations, Mia. You found your place." Meg looked at Yabamiya with a smile. "Thank you." Yabamiya smiled. Her two ponytails looked energetic every day, but her eyes were slightly moist. She suddenly pounced into Meg's arms and choked up as she said, "Thank you, boss. You deserve all of this." Meg looked down at the back of her head that only reached his chest and patted her back gently with a smile. This half-dragon girl who had fainted in front of the restaurant because of hunger finally found her place. Meg was sincerely happy for her. After a while, Mia let go of Meg and took 2 steps back. She blushed. She didn't dare to look into Meg's eyes. She lowered her eyes and shyly said, I seem to be a little too excited. It doesn't matter. No one saw it anyway." Mag closed the restaurant's door with a smile. He turned and walked to the kitchen as he said, "We need to entertain over 100 customers at the same time this morning. Other than Buddha jumps over the wall, we will open all the menu. We have to finish all the preparations before 8 a.m. So many people." As an old employee of the restaurant, Mia knew how much preparation work needed to be done. She quickly caught up with him and asked, "Do you need me to do anything?" "Get a stool and be a good audience at the door." Meg took down the fat head fish from the knife rack and turned around with a smile. "Please start your performance." Mia moved a stool to the kitchen door and gestured with her hand. The fat head fish swept across like lightning, and the ingredients flew everywhere. When they landed, they were stacked neatly on the plates. "Wow, boss, your knife skills are so good." Yabamiya stood up and applauded in amazement. "It's just a routine operation." Meg smiled. This was the best use of an audience. The preparation of the ingredients was completed very quickly. Meg cooked some dishes that needed to be cooked in advance, such as braised pork, preserved egg and lean meat porridge, tofu pudding, and so on. After Meg finished the preparation work, he looked at Mia, who was sitting at the door and looking at him with admiration, and asked, "What do you want to eat in the morning?" Mia thought for a moment and said, "Tofu pudding and youtiao." "Okay, I'll make them for you when Amy and the others wake up." Meg nodded with a smile. "Okay." Mia nodded and moved the stool back to its original position. "Your master might also attend today's meeting." "Really?" Mia's eyes lit up. She didn't have time to talk to her master much yesterday. If she could see him today, it would be a happy thing. Amy woke up soon after, and everyone ate breakfast. Irina sat at the side with a cup of warm water. As the representative of the Night Elves, she had to eat with the other representatives later. "Sister Irina, are you really not eating?" Amy dipped the youtiao in the soy milk and put it into her mouth. "Yes, I'll eat later. Irina took a sip of the water. That's a good idea. Otherwise, you'll feel even worse sitting there alone while everyone is eating, Mag said with a smile. Michael had obviously treated the meal at Mamie restaurant as a warm-up game. He could get the various representatives with their own agendas to sit at the same table and at the same time disperse their energy. I can have a bowl of tofu pudding first, Irina said elegantly with her hands crossed. Wait a moment. Meg got up and walked into the kitchen. He came out with a bowl of sweet tofu pudding after a while. The first day's schedule is actually going to Mamie's for a meeting? This city lord is too good. Connie muttered in surprise as she walked out of the city lord's mansion with the itinerary. I wonder if Mr. Mac will provide. Buddha jumps over the wall in the morning. A familiar voice sounded from the side. Master. Connie turned around and saw Rex leaning against the wall. She was surprised and elated as she asked, Why are you here? As the deputy warden of Badai Prison and the only surviving witness of the Urba tribe's tragedy, I also received Michael's invitation. Rex took out an invitation from his pocket and waved it. Then, why didn't you come back with me? Connie asked curiously again. To train you. See? I told you that I can come to Chaos City alone, Connie said smugly. Yes. It's just that those fellows who were waiting on the path you had to pass by had waited for a day in vain. They would be punished when they go back. Rex had an indescribable expression on his face. Someone wanted to stop me? Connie blinked, and then smilingly said, Actually, I had already expected it. That's why I went around them on purpose. Such a king-like awareness. As expected of me. Only you could do something like that. Rex rolled his eyes. He didn't know how to evaluate this disciple of his. Let's go, master. Let's go to the restaurant for breakfast. Connie smiled as she pulled Rex's sleeve and walked towards a horse-drawn carriage at the side. The city lord's mansion had prepared horse-drawn carriages for the various representatives. No pop-up window. Chapter 1753. The dragon started, and Chaos City played host. Even though this impromptu meeting was not official enough, it was still treated seriously by the various tribes. At least, that was what the various tribes had sent out. The horse-drawn carriages set off from the city lord's castle and soon formed a long queue in front of Mamie's. The various tribes' representatives alighted from the horse-drawn carriages and were a little confused when they saw the tightly shut restaurant door. What's going on? City Lord Michael asked us to come here, but we're not allowed to enter? Oster said unhappily as he alighted from the horse-drawn carriage. Dykus went forward with a smile and explained, I'm sorry, Chief Oster. There are still 5 minutes until the agreed time with Mamie's. Also, the various tribes' representatives are arriving one after another. Please wait for a while longer. Connie jumped down from the horse-drawn carriage at the side and pursed her lips as she said, Mr. Mac is a man of rules and punctuality. He's not as shameless as some people. You. Oster glanced at Connie coldly with a murderous look in his eyes. Connie leaned towards Rex and said fearlessly, I am a beautiful young lady. A few orcs around Oster came forward immediately. Some of them were already preparing to draw their weapons, and the atmosphere became a little tense. Forget it. Oster raised his hand to stop the orcs from doing what they were going to do. He looked at Connie coldly and said, Even though I'm surprised to see you in Chaos City, this meeting concerns the interests of all the orcs. I hope you can make the right choice. Then I'd advise you to give up the idea of starting a war. The orcs don't need war, and they can't get the benefits they want from war. They can only get the benefits that you want, Connie said with a cold smile. Very well. I hope you can still say this in front of me the next time I see you. Oster was so angry that he laughed. Are you an idiot? Do you need me to repeat the same thing to you? Connie looked at Oster as if he was an idiot. Humph. Oster snorted and walked in another direction. Don't be afraid, I'm here. Lex reached out and patted Connie's stiff shoulder. Phew. Connie let out a soft sigh of relief. She twisted her body due to her nervousness. This was the big boss villain that she only dared to peek at from behind. Now, she actually dared to mock him back then. She couldn't help but feel a little proud. Master, am I great? It's all right. Lex nodded perfunctorily. I'm a big shot now, so I have to pay attention to my image. After all, we are the representatives of the Beastmen's Justice and Order Alliance. We can't let others look down on us. Connie tidied her clothes and put her hands behind her back. She looked around like an old cadre. When she saw many legendary figures among the representatives of the various races, she couldn't help but click her tongue in amazement. Her aura weakened a little. The two horse-drawn carriages stopped in front of the restaurant, and Josh stepped out of the horse-drawn carriage. He looked at the restaurant's tightly shut doors and the various representatives standing at the restaurant's entrance with furrowed brows. He was a little displeased as he thought to himself, is this Chaos City trying to intimidate the various representatives? Wow, City Lord Michael is so sincere. He actually booked Mamie's. This is the restaurant's legal holiday. I wonder how much the City Lord paid, Vanessa said in surprise as she stepped out of the horse-drawn carriage. Vanessa's little face was filled with excitement. She didn't forget to confirm with Dicus, who was standing at the side. Are our 3 meals really provided by Mamie's today? Mr. Mack made them himself? You didn't just book a venue? Yes. Mamie's will be the organizer for the first day of the conference, so they will provide the venue and 3 meals for the various representatives, Dicus said with a smile. That's great. Vanessa was so happy that she jumped up and down on the spot. However, she quickly felt the gazes from the people around her, so she quickly restrained her actions and expressions. After all, she was representing the Roth Empire now. She might be happy, but she had to watch her actions. Is this the restaurant that you've been thinking about? Josh asked with a smile. Yes, yes. Moreover, Big Brother Josh, you even know the owner of this restaurant. He's the chef that you recommended for Royal Father's birthday banquet and even won the Best Dish Award, Vanessa said with a nod. So, it's him. Josh pondered for a moment and quickly remembered Meg. His dishes were indeed very memorable. Yes, Mr. Mack's dishes are super delicious. Red braised pork, roast beef kebabs, spicy grilled fish, durian pizza, tofu pudding, spicy crayfish, Peking duck. Vanessa listed out her family's treasures, and the representatives who were eavesdropping couldn't help but swallow their saliva. The resentment of being locked out of the restaurant also lessened significantly. He sent 2 children here. Andre really doesn't care about the other races at all. Oster suddenly came over and interrupted Vanessa with a cold smile. Josh instinctively shielded Vanessa behind him and smiled at Oster. Royal Father is busy with state affairs and can't take the time to attend this conference. Therefore, he sent me, Princess Vanessa, President Richard, and the rest to attend the conference together. This shows how important this conference is to the Roth Empire. I wonder why Chief Oster said so? Richard and the other 2 10th-tier powerhouses went forward to protect Josh and Vanessa. They were already holding their magic casters' staffs and longswords. The Roth Empire and the Twilight Forest were neighbors. They had been at war for many years, and their relationship wasn't harmonious. Meanwhile, the orcs were led by the August tribe. Those tribes had been in constant conflict with the Roth Empire, and their grudges were deep. Both sides were at daggers drawn, and the atmosphere became tense. Dicus couldn't help but have a headache when he saw this scene. He chose Amy's to prevent such conflicts from happening, but he didn't expect it to happen before he entered the restaurant. This situation wasn't something that a civil official like him could handle. Why? It's not open yet. Seems like everyone is a little early. Right at this moment, a loud and clear voice sounded. Michael stopped riding his black horse and flipped down. He stood between the orcs and the Roth Empire's representatives and smiled at Oster. Chief Oster, long time no see. Michael, long time no see. Oster restrained his coldness and raised his hand to signal the orcs to come back. Michael turned to Josh and the rest with a smile and said, Your Highness Josh, Princess Vanessa, and President Richard, hello? Hello, City Lord. Vanessa lifted her skirt and bowed slightly, full marks for etiquette. City Lord Michael, Royal Father asked me to send his regards. Josh also nodded slightly. Hello, Castellan. Richard nodded calmly. The tense atmosphere between both parties eased a little. On account of the host, they separated temporarily. The elven representatives are here. Just then, 3 horse-drawn carriages appeared on the long street. The one in the lead was a luxurious blue crystal carriage. A handsome elf was riding on 4 Pegasi with pure white wings. Princess Irina is here too. Soon, someone noticed the purple-striped griffin flying in the sky. There was a snowy white figure standing on the griffin's back. Chapter 1754. Compared to the all-out war between the Abyss Demons and the Flaming Demons, the elven Princess Irina's betrayal of the Wind Forest with her elven slaves, and the establishment of the Night Elves to confront the Wind Forest also attracted the attention of the various forces on the Norland continent. Irina, who was once seen as the next queen of the elves, was famous for her powerful abilities and her love for Alex. No one would have thought that the Elven Queen would stand against the Wind Forest after she went into seclusion. It seemed like the Night Elves who were accepted by Chaos City had also received an invitation today. As for that famous purple-striped griffin, many people present knew that it was that man's mount. Meanwhile, the Wind Forest had already heard that they had sent their new elven princess, Sally, to attend the meeting yesterday. Many people were looking forward to the confrontation between the new and old elven princesses, the Wind Forest, and the Night Elves. Irina. Josh looked up at Irina with a burning gaze. However, when his gaze landed on that purple-striped griffin, his gaze became a little colder. Although he didn't see Alex, this purple-striped griffin already represented his attitude and stance. No one could ignore it. The crystal horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of the restaurant. The door opened, and Sally, who was wearing a gorgeous blue dress, walked out slowly. She glanced in the direction of the restaurant, and her eyes lit up. However, the light quickly disappeared. Is this the elven race's new princess? Her abilities seem to be much weaker than Irina's. She is already considered a prodigy to have such abilities at such a young age. It's just that Irina is too dazzling. Apart from Alex, who else can be on par with her? I wonder if Irina will make things difficult for this new princess. The elves' lineup is really not her match. The representatives at the side were discussing softly. A few elves also quickly jumped down from the 2 horse-drawn carriages behind. They went up to protect the crystal horse-drawn carriage with nervous expressions as they looked up at the sky. Chaos City really doesn't know their place. They even invited the Night Elves, Elliot said with a gloomy expression. The purple-striped griffin slowly descended under everyone's gaze and finally hovered a meter above the ground. The surrounding horses and mounts nervously retreated to the sides. Everyone's eyes were attracted to Irina, who was on the back of the griffin. In the past 100 years, Irina, who had shown amazing talent since young, and Alex, who had appeared out of nowhere, were undoubtedly the most dazzling twins. What was even more frightening was that these 2 heavens favorites had crossed the line and fallen in love with each other. Although Alex was seriously injured and disappeared in a rainy night 3 years ago, Irina had also been silent for 3 years. However, just as people were about to forget about them, they once again appeared in front of everyone in a powerful manner, causing the world to tremble for them. Irina glanced at Sally, who was standing on the crystal carriage. She took a step forward and landed on the ground lightly. Seeing that the elves' limelight was stolen, Elliot sneered and said, "The Night Elves are indeed shabby. Only one of you actually came to the meeting. Do you think you can defeat Ozzy or me?" Irina glanced at Elliot and mocked him. Elliot choked. He looked at the purple-striped griffin that was glaring at him, and then at Irina. He stammered, I won't stoop to your level. Seems like the Tree of Life has accepted you," Irina said to Sally. "Yes." Sally nodded slightly and glanced at Irina gratefully. She knew why the Tree of Life accepted her. Irina didn't say anything else. She waved her hand, and Ozzy glanced in the direction of the restaurant before disappearing into a purple lightning bolt. "Where's Alex?" Everyone looked at the purple lightning bolt that disappeared into the sky and was puzzled. They heard that Alex had been appearing in Chaos City recently. Why didn't he come with Irina? Big sister Irina. Vanessa waved at Irina happily. Irina glanced at her and nodded slightly. Josh, who was at the side, tidied his clothes and revealed a warm smile. He looked at Irina and said, "Long time no see." Before he could finish his sentence, Irina had already retracted her gaze as if she didn't see him at all. The smile on Josh's face froze, and he withdrew his hand awkwardly. Vanessa looked at Josh doubtfully. In her impression, big brother Josh and big sister Irina seemed to be on good terms, so why was she ignoring him? It's not open yet? Just then, a golden light descended from the sky. Lewis and Jinx walked out, and were surprised to see the restaurant that was still closed. A silver light appeared, and Douglas walked out with a cold voice and said, "What's the harm in waiting?" The Tyrannosaurus never waits for anyone. An irritated voice sounded from the sky, and a black giant dragon that was hundreds of meters long descended. When it landed, it turned into a middle-aged man in black armor. Golden Dragon Lewis, Frost Dragon Douglas, and Tyrannosaurus Franklin. The three giants of the giant dragon tribe have actually come. The various representatives couldn't hide their surprise when they saw the last three people to arrive. Right at this moment, the restaurant's door that had been closed all this while finally opened slowly. Meg stood at the entrance of the restaurant with a smile and said, "Representatives of the various races, welcome to Mamie's, 8 a.m. sharp, not a minute late." "Mr. Mack is indeed a punctual man," Vanessa praised as she glanced at her watch. "Mr. Mack, if you still don't open the door, I won't be able to stop them from tearing down the restaurant," Michael said with a smile. "Punctuality is my professional ethics." Meg smiled as he stepped aside to let the door open. "Representatives of the various races, please enter and take your seats according to your name tag," Michael said to everyone with a smile as he stepped onto the stairs. Then, he walked into the restaurant first. The various representatives who had been waiting at the door for a while entered one after another. Many of them couldn't help but take a second look at Meg. It was this ordinary-looking human who had actually left them outside for so long. Just what kind of confidence did he have? "Mr. Mack, I'm here again." Vanessa walked to the door and winked at Meg. Meg nodded with a smile. He already knew about Vanessa's identity, so he wasn't too surprised. "Mr. Meg, long time no see." Josh stopped in his tracks and also smiled at Meg. "Long time no see, second prince." Meg nodded slightly and replied calmly. As there were still various representatives waiting to enter, Josh didn't say anything and followed Vanessa into the restaurant. "Ahem, I'm here." Connie walked in with her hands behind her back. She deliberately coughed twice to make her presence felt. Meg only responded calmly and nodded at Rex. His gaze quickly turned to Sally, who was walking over with the elves surrounding her. Sally looked up and happened to look in the direction of the restaurant's entrance. Chapter 1755. As the restaurant's second customer and second official employee, Sally had accompanied the restaurant through its initial stages. She was a very capable employee. Of course, Meg didn't just treat the ladies in the restaurant as employees. The ladies came from all over the world, and most of them had extraordinary identities. Perhaps Mamie's was indeed a special place, and that was why such a special group of people could gather here. Of course, he wouldn't admit that he was the princess harvester. Outside of work, they were friends. He was very happy to be able to see Sally again at Mamie's. This was also her first time back at Mamie's. However, this time, her identity was no longer that noble elven lady who had to use the fake name Aisha. She was the new Princess Sally. Because the former princess was his wife, Meg always felt a little awkward with this identity. Yabamiya also saw Sally in the crowd, and her eyes lit up. She was pleasantly surprised and wanted to greet Sally. "Amy is here. Big sister Mia, what can I do for you?" Amy had appeared with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and was standing in front of Mia with her head tilted up. Amy." Mia looked down at Amy, who was winking at her, and suddenly remembered what Meg had told her during breakfast. She quickly swallowed the rest of her words and shook her head slightly. "Nothing. I just want to confirm where you are. I didn't go anywhere. I'm very obedient." Amy grinned. She sat down on a small stool with Ugly Duckling in her arms and warmly welcomed the various representatives into the restaurant. "Welcome to Mamie's. We have good wine and good food. Eat to your heart's content, but remember to pay." The various representatives who entered the restaurant couldn't help but take a few more glances at Amy. This half-elf girl was so cute. Even the troll representative liked her a little. Aisha is so beautiful today, but has she become the elven princess? That's amazing. Mia sneaked a peek at Sally. Judging from her cold expression and the way she looked straight ahead, it seemed that she didn't recognize her anymore. She couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Elliot glanced at Amy and sneered in a low voice, "Humph, a hybrid of an elf and a human. What a disgrace to the elven race." Meg and Irina looked at Elliot at the same time, their eyes flashing dangerously. Sally glanced at Elliot and said coldly, "She's the disciple of Crassus and Julian. I hope you can say that loudly in front of them." She. Elliot opened his mouth slightly. When he thought of the two unreasonable old men, he subconsciously shrank his neck and looked at Amy with a hint of fear. "Forget it. I'll spare your life today." Irina tossed the folding chair back to Elliot as a gesture of respect for the elven race. Of course, she was doing this for Sally's sake. Meg also withdrew his gaze. He was just an ordinary chef now. If he were to kill a 10th-tier elf, it would be a little inappropriate for him. If he were to fall apart, it would be difficult for him to rebuild his image in the future. Sally walked to the door and nodded slightly at Meg. When she passed by Mia, she suddenly winked at her. Mia's eyes lit up, but Sally had already walked past her expressionlessly. Her cold and aloof demeanor suggested that she had never made any funny faces before. Sally really does recognize me. But it seems like she can't show that she knows us, Mia thought happily in her heart while trying to maintain a professional expression on her face. Immediately after, Camilla, who was wearing a bright red gown, and Dracula, who was wearing a black tuxedo, walked in. They nodded slightly at Meg and the rest without batting an eyelid, and then walked towards their seats with powerful auras. "My good disciple, Master is here to see you again," Lewis said with a smile as he walked directly in front of Mia. "Disciple?" The representatives of the various races who had already arrived turned around to look. Their gazes landed on Mia, who was wearing a maid's outfit, and Lewis, who was standing in front of her. They were rather shocked. "Fuck. Lewis, when did you take in a disciple?" Franklin stared at Yabamiya with wide eyes in disbelief. "Yesterday," Lewis said smugly. Franklin stared at Mia for a while and asked doubtfully, "Is she your illegitimate daughter?" Great minds think alike. Jinx, who was standing at the side, gave him a thumbs up silently. Scram. Lewis didn't explain further and walked into the restaurant after saying goodbye. All the representatives were deep in thought. They felt that they had already gotten a big surprise before the meeting even started. This restaurant was really not simple. The owner's daughter was taken in as a disciple by Crassus and Julian at the same time, and a mere waitress was also taken in as a disciple by the chief of the Golden Dragon tribe. Then, they swept their gazes across the other waitresses and were shocked again. Other than the little demon with horns standing in the corner and the human waitress who looked ordinary, the charming succubus girl at the side was actually an 8th-tier magic caster. 8th-tier succubi were rarer than 10th-tier magic casters. They had almost never appeared on the Norland continent in recent years. Meanwhile, the young girl of an unknown race also had 8th-tier magic waves on her, and she looked like she was only 17 or 18 years old. In the entire Norland continent, this was a shocking talent that could shock the ancients and dazzle the contemporaries. But they were actually waitresses here? What is the identity of this restaurant's owner? All the representatives were shocked, and they couldn't help but size Meg up again. Meg could feel the scrutinizing gazes and merely smiled. They didn't know that the new elven princess sitting over there used to be in charge of cleaning at Mamie's, that the female chief of the Falk tribe used to be the restaurant's delivery person, that Countess Bartoli, who was swirling her glass of red wine elegantly, was in charge of cutting the princess, and that Princess Elizabeth of the Frost Dragon tribe didn't come to work due to personal reasons. If they knew, they would probably go crazy. "An ordinary man," the dwarf chief commented. Many representatives nodded in agreement. They couldn't see anything special about Meg. "Today, Mamie's will be in charge of all 3 of your meals. Every representative will have a menu in hand. Now, you can start ordering," Meg said to everyone with a smile. Before entering the restaurant, Meg had rearranged the restaurant. He put the dining tables together to form a large round table, so as to avoid unnecessary disputes due to seating arrangements. The seating arrangement of the various races was decided by the city lord's castle. They separated the races who had old grudges with each other, but didn't let them be too far away from each other and cause inconvenience in communication. No pop-up window. Chapter 1756. The various representatives took their seats, flipped open the menu, and started ordering. Meg stood at the side and sized up the various representatives quietly. The Roth Empire sent Josh and Richard. Did that mean that Andre was biased towards Josh in choosing the Crown Prince? That was something to think about. As for Vanessa, she should just be tagging along for the free food. Among the orcs, the August tribe and the Falk tribe were divided into the main battle camp and the main battle camp. Oster personally led the main battle camp, and 3 10th-tier powerhouses came. In terms of aura, they obviously suppressed Connie and Rex. Of course, if Rex cut his hair, they should be on par with each other. The demon race had the most representatives. 5 out of the top 10 demon races had sent their representatives. The Flaming Demon race and the Abyss Demon race were separated by the 3 giants of the Giant Dragon race. After taking their seats, the rage level of the representatives from both sides decreased significantly. The Fear Demon's representatives sized up Irina with a complicated expression. Bahil's death had dealt a huge blow to their reputation. However, the other party was Irina and Alex, after all, and they had a good reason to do so. They could only swallow their pride. Camilla and Dracula, who had brought their own red wine, were already drinking it unhurriedly. The one that caught Meg's attention the most was the Shavara sitting on Camilla's left, Weston. Many of the attackers died on the spot during that rainy night more than 3 years ago, and this was the guy who suggested killing him and Amy together. This guy left a deep impression in Meg's inherited memories. Since you're here, you don't have to go back this time. Meg's gaze turned cold. He didn't meet him in the Endless Sea the last time, but he came to him himself this time. The goblins and elves were separated by the forest trolls' representatives. The 2 tribes were neighbors and had many conflicts. Recently, because the goblins opened the underground caverns at the border for the night elves to use, and allowed the night elves to retreat from the goblins' territory, the relationship between the 2 tribes became like fire and water. The dwarves in Issen Castle looked harmless as they flipped through the menu seriously. As a technology-oriented race, they had a pretty good relationship with all the other races. They were considered a neutral race apart from Chaos City. For the various representatives, this was also a very special experience. It was not rare for the host to provide food and drink, but they had never held a meeting directly in a restaurant. According to the boss, their first day of meeting was going to be held at this temporary round table, and they were going to have 3 meals here. Is Chaos City lacking funds? Isn't the layout of the venue a little too simple? Many representatives could not help but look at Michael. Michael held the menu with a smile and didn't say anything. Chaos City really didn't lack money. Furthermore, if they could find a venue in the City Lord's castle, they could save hundreds of thousands of copper coins. Do you think Mr. Mac is cheap? No, it was extraordinarily expensive. Mr. Mac, is there still a limited variety of breakfast in the morning? Vanessa looked at Meg and asked, limited variety? Everyone was puzzled when they heard that. Can't we have hot pot in the morning? Lewis asked anxiously when he heard that. You can order all the dishes on the menu. The restaurant will provide an hour of service for all of you, Meg explained. Hot pot is also available. Vanessa's eyes lit up as she looked at the hot pot section at the back of the menu. Yes, we can provide hot pot. Meg nodded with a smile. Then, I want to have hot pot. The insanely spicy hot pot base. Then, I want a portion of beef, 2 portions of duck intestines, 2 portions of tripe, 1 portion of spicy beef, 1 portion of... Vanessa began to order eagerly. She had been craving hot pot recently. She had even dreamed about it in her dreams. She didn't care about the fact that she should eat something light in the morning. I want hot pot too, Lewis said as he raised his hand. Master, do you want hot pot too? Yabamiya confirmed with Lewis. Master seemed to be reluctant to eat hot pot yesterday. He didn't expect him to take the initiative to eat hot pot today. Actually, it's him who wants to eat. Lewis pointed at Jinx and helplessly said, I wanted to satisfy my junior's wish, so I ate with him. Jinx's eyes widened. He looked at Lewis's dangerous gaze and nodded with a bitter expression. Yes, I want to eat. We want a double pot, and all the dishes will be for 4 people. That's it. Lewis nodded with satisfaction. What flavor do you want for the hot pot base? Yabamiya continued to ask. Lewis and Jinx looked at each other. The medium spicy hot pot base yesterday was already too much for them. They wanted to order a mildly spicy one, but the young lady opposite them asked for the insanely spicy one, which put them in an awkward position. We want the insanely spicy one too, Lewis said decisively. Jinx's eyelids twitched. He felt that this wasn't the right choice. All right. Yabamiya nodded slightly and noted down their orders. The Princess of the Roth Empire and Lewis of the Golden Dragon tribe both chose hot pot. Could hot pot be this restaurant's signature dish? The customers who hadn't made up their minds flipped the menu to the designated hot pot area. When they couldn't decide what to eat, it was always right to order. I want an insanely spicy hot pot too, Oster said. Real men wanted insanely spicy ones. There's an insanely spicy hot pot here too. We trolls want 3 portions. It's also insanely spicy. All the representatives started to order. Hot pot became the best-selling breakfast item. In order to prove themselves, they all ordered the insanely spicy one. Meg frowned slightly. He didn't expect everyone to love hot pot so much. Luckily, the hot pot base was already prepared. He just had to adjust it to the insanely spicy one. However, with the insanely spicy starting breakfast, today's negotiation wouldn't be too harmonious. Shall we order an insanely spicy hot pot too? Dracula was already prepared to raise his hand. If you don't want to spend the next few days singing about your broken chrysanthemum, I advise you not to order this, Camilla said calmly. Then, she smiled at Mia, who was walking to her, and said, I want a medium-rare steak and a savory tofu pudding. I'd like the same one. Dracula followed suit and said, All right, please wait a moment. Mia nodded with a smile and walked to the last elven representative who hadn't ordered yet. 3 portions of insanely spicy hot pot. Elliot already said readily. The elves couldn't lose to the other races in terms of presents. I don't eat hot pot. Sally interrupted Elliot coldly. She looked at Mia and said, I want a sweet tofu pudding and a Yangzhou fried rice. All right, please wait a moment. Yabamiya walked to the kitchen with a smile. Reina, you're in charge of the hot pot base. Leave the cutting to me, Meg said as he prepared the side dishes for the hot pot in the kitchen. Chapter 1757. Meg knew that Vanessa was a lady who could take spicy food very well. However, he didn't know if the various representatives who had been led astray by her to order the insanely spicy food could really take the ravages of the insanely spicy food. Give me a moment. Let me confirm the taste. Reina quickly finished mixing the soup base for the hot pot. Mia and Gina were about to serve the dishes when Meg stopped them. The tins of insanely spicy soup pots emitted a pungent spicy smell that made one want to cry. Is it really okay to eat this so early in the morning? Mia asked worriedly. Very few people ordered the insanely spicy soup pots. Normal people couldn't take the spiciness at all. It has to be okay even if it can't. The various representatives here are mostly 9th tier and above. If they can't even finish something that a little girl can eat, it would be too embarrassing, Meg said with a smile as he sprinkled the insanely spicy powder buns into the soup pots. Do you still want it to be spicy? Reina was a little surprised. She had strictly mixed the insanely spicy soup pots according to the ratio, but Meg was adding several times the insanely spicy now. Yes, we have to add a little more spiciness according to the customer's characteristics so that it would suit their taste better. Meg nodded with a smile. He kept the insanely spicy and pointed to the first 10 soup pots and Mia. These soup pots are for the Roth Empire's representative team, the Havoc Demons representative team, the August Tribe's representative team, and the Elves representative team. Serve them one by one. All right, Mia nodded and walked out of the kitchen with 2 soup pots. What a pungent smell. The various representatives, who were in an awkward silence after ordering, immediately smelled that pungent spicy smell. They couldn't help but look at Yabamiya. Ah, the goblin representative, who was closest to the kitchen door. sneezed 3 times in a row. He looked at the single hot pot placed in front of him in a daze. The red chili almost covered the entire pot, and the pungent, spicy smell was coming from the pot. Tears were already glistening in his eyes, and then flowed down his cheeks uncontrollably. Is this the spicy taste? Isn't this too spicy? The 2 goblin representatives tilted their heads slightly and wiped away the tears on their faces without batting an eyelid. However, under the steaming of the spicy smell, they could not control their tears for a while. As the spiciness spread, the various representatives could no longer sit still. This spiciness had clearly exceeded their expectations. Just smelling it made their throats dry and itchy. Their tastes are really heavy. Connie, who had ordered soy milk, fried dough sticks, and kebabs, clicked her tongue. Even she didn't dare to try the insanely spicy food. But these people were fighting over it. It's a pity that we don't have. Buddha jumps over the wall, Lex said regretfully. He ordered a plate of fried rice and 10,000 yuan of soy milk. Dracula gloated as he looked at the solemn expressions on everyone's faces. He smiled and said to Camilla, "Seems like you're quite familiar with this restaurant." "I come here to eat occasionally," Camilla said calmly as she sipped a mouthful of red wine. The insanely spicy hot pot was served to the table like flowing water. Each person had a small pot, and the soup started to boil as soon as it was served. The strong and stimulating spiciness spread along with the steam. It was as though they had entered an insanely spicy sauna. That sour and refreshing feeling was simply indescribable. This hot pot doesn't seem to be the case. Elliot was also a little uneasy now. As a man who had 3 times the amount of the insanely spicy hot pot, just smelling that pungent spiciness made his face and ears turn red. His eyes were red, and he wanted to stay away from that hot pot. "We've fallen into a trap this time." Lewis and Jinx exchanged glances and saw despair in each other's eyes. Speaking of which, they were the ones who led the various representatives into this trap. If they hadn't ordered the insanely spicy hot pot, the others wouldn't have followed suit. "We ordered the insanely spicy ourselves. We have to eat it even if we have tears in our eyes," Jinx said softly. "You don't have to tell me that." Lewis rolled his eyes. He was ready to die. "Isn't it just a little spicy?" "This is the taste." "Perfect," Vanessa said with satisfaction as she took a deep sniff of the pot. She could finally eat the hot pot that she had been longing for. "Is this soup?" Josh looked at the insanely spicy hot pot in front of him with furrowed brows. As a man who had been ravaged by the insanely spicy grilled fish, he knew very well what this spiciness meant. That was the downfall of the chrysanthemum. It was an indescribable pain. It was a deep roar in the middle of the night, however. He was representing the Roth Empire now. He had to show enough courage and not weaken the Empire's dignity. "Heh, isn't it just a pot of soup? I'll drink it first." "Orly, here." Oster scooped a bowl of soup into his bowl and gulped it down. Everyone quietened down instantly. The various representatives all looked at Oster with shock in their eyes. "Do you want to follow?" There were also people who were looking at the hot pot in front of them, deep in thought. "Oh my God." Yabamiya covered her mouth. This was her first time seeing someone drink the insanely spicy hot pot soup. "This is 10 times the insanely spicy." Reina also swallowed her saliva. 10 times the insanely spicy, 10 times the joy. Meg shrugged. As a 10th-tier powerhouse who had been famous for a long time, the #1 iron-blooded man among the orcs, and the man who was said to be able to fight a giant dragon barehanded, Oster had a crazy amount of confidence in himself. How could a man who could eat a cow raw be frightened by a small sip of soup? It was time to show off the orc's muscles and let others know how powerful he was. In the next second, Oster held his throat and slid down from his chair. He half knelt on the ground with a red face. Roar! Oster punched the ground, and the entire restaurant shook. His face was as red as a piece of metal that had just been taken out from a charcoal furnace. Beads of sweat rolled down his face, and tears flowed from the corners of his eyes uncontrollably. He choked with sobs as he said, "Spicy. It's so spicy." The various representatives stared at this scene with their mouths agape. This was Oster. the #1 powerhouse among the orcs. He actually cried because of the spiciness? Is it time to arrange the headlines of the Orcs Daily tomorrow? Shocking. The #1 powerhouse among the orcs kneels down and cries. The reason is so insanely spicy. Connie, who was sitting at the side, said as he touched his chin. I think this headline will do. Rex nodded. We can't afford it. The various representatives who were prepared to follow put down the hot pot soup they had scooped. Compared to fighting for their dignity, it was obviously more important to maintain their dignity. This was a demonic soup that could make a 10th-tier powerhouse cry. At times like this, the Roth Empire will never admit defeat. Josh picked up a bowl of hot pot soup and drank it all in one gulp. Big brother Josh, this is not how you eat hot pot. Vanessa looked at Josh, who was holding his throat and sliding to the ground in tears. She wanted to stop him, but it was too late. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.